Hello, friends and enemies. So, this will be a relatively speaking short stream today. I just had a job interview at Subway. It was a wonderful interview. I actually really like the environment there, you know? Like, no joke. Like, the atmosphere was cool. Manager was interested in actually understanding and getting to know a potential employee, which is always a good sign. Like, that is something you always want to see in an employer. Genuine interest. So, that all being said, we've got daily quests we gotta do. Let's do the dailies. Do them quick, because D&D starts in... somewhere between 3 and 4 hours from now. Hang on. Oh wait, I got a Paimon notification. Notices. Oh, right. Hang on. Update summary. Whoop. Okay. Join me. Okay. Okay. I've got mail. I have already claimed all of the rewards from the event, so good. Means tomorrow's event we'll be able to focus on, right? Okay, so before we get too carried away, let's get the daily quest on Taste of Home. Alright. Oh, right. The reason I'm in Liyue in the first place, I've got a reputation reward to pick up. Huh. I don't know why I forgot about that. But yeah. So... give me a moment. I gotta take care of the reputation reward. Because the sooner I can get to the point I can make the compasses and harvest the ingredients for the compasses, the sooner we can start getting what few free Primogems there are available left in Liyue and Mondstadt. Alright. How's my reputation in Liyue? Yee! Finally, I can claim that quest. Okay. Back. Okay. Now. Where was I? Right. Expedition reward. Will have to be claimed later because I have to teleport. So yes, if you're wondering why I'm so quiet, here, let me correct that for you. Bam, microphone is closer now. We have been having some technical difficulties here for the last several months. I do hope eventually we'll be able to get them corrected, but until that happens, yeah. Talk to Tang Wen. Liyue cuisine. Da 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 da. Some sweet Liyue snacks. All right. Rice buns. Aren't these all your favorite food? Tricolor Dungo. Okay. Do I have any tricolor Dungo on me is the question. Because if so, I can just go right up to her. Nope. Okay. Let's go cook a tricolor dongo. Head to the nearest cooking pot. Do I have the ingredients for a tricolor dongo? I actually do not. I'm missing 2 sakura blooms. Huh. Okay. Where do I find... Okay. Let me look that up, because I do have the map. I do have the map. Somewhere. Yes? Map. Me. Ho. Yo. Oh, right. The reason I didn't stream yesterday is because I did stream yesterday. Early yesterday morning. Haha. Yeah, so that's a thing. I am officially no longer needing Geoculuses or Animoculuses. I completed my collections of those. Electroculus is all we've got left. So let's go ahead and focus on getting the daily quests done. We have sakura blooms that we need to get. Yeah. And it looks like there are a few places to get them really close by, actually. Okay, yeah, there are a few places in Arayumi. Alright, let's go ahead and go to Arayumi. Teleport. So, if you're wondering why there's no music and you're not hearing voices right at the moment, it's because I have them turned off so that we can do something that I like doing. I like listening to podcasts. We're gonna go ahead. I do not agree with half of the people talking in something. But there was a debate a while back between Charlie Kirk and someone we've listened to on this channel before, Vosh, on Tim Pool's channel, and I have no problem.
They went out in the streets, and then this resulted...
I have no problem listening to this.
Political debate or discussion about this, but there is a question some people have brought up due to the low level of vaccination among the black community and how that will disproportionately affect people and whether or not this will be truly equitable. But today, the bigger thing we're doing is not just about the news. It's about a conversation with 2 prominent individuals in politics. We've got Charlie Kirk, who I'm sure most of you know. Do you want to just briefly introduce yourself?
Charlie Kirk, honored to be here. We're gonna have some fun.
Do you describe yourself politically in any way? Like,
I guess you could say I'm on the right.
Conservative?
Yeah, more than that. I'm
And then-
conservative and love the country.
Right on. Then, of course, we have Vosh. Join it.
Howdy. Yeah, I'm Vosh. I'm a YouTuber. And I guess I call myself a libertarian socialist. I like some parts of the country. I'm a
Do I
big
have the
fan of
sakura
some parts of
blooms?
it.
Do I
Some
have-
other parts I think could use some improvement.
Right on. Now, we've got Ian here, as per usual.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to be in the chat today watching your super chats, so keep sending them in, and I'll be clipping them so that we can get to it at the end of the show.
Hang on.
Hi.
And I'm very excited, so I'm just going to interject here. I'm excited for this conversation. I'm going to be switching like a crazy person, and hopefully tonight goes really well, and we all learn something new.
And before we jump in, head over to timcast.com, become a member to get an ad-free experience and exclusive access to members-only
How to
segments of
collect
this show.
soccer
And I guess
attention.
I wasn't initially planning on, but I guess everyone's cool to do a member segment after the show, and we'll find something fun to talk about. So, we'll see how it plays out. So make sure you become a member.
Must be
Make sure you like this
inflicted
video,
with
subscribe to this
electro.
channel, share it with your friends. If you think this conversation is important, I'm sure there are many right-wing individuals like, get him, Charlie, crush Vosh. And there's a lot of left-wing people being like, Vosh is going to own. No, we'll share it with your friends, and let's have a good conversation. And I suppose we can start with one of two things. Obviously, I brought up critical race theory, but also the vaccine issue. I'm not sure if you guys have a preference for what you were.
We can talk about the vaccine.
Why don't we talk about what's going on with vaccine passports?
Sure.
We've seen in Sydney, for instance, they issued a lockdown. Or I should say enough people ignored it. They went out in the streets, and then this resulted in news articles saying chaos in Sydney. People aren't, they're not following the rules. The vaccination rate in Australia is ridiculously low. I think it's 18%, really, really low. Well, then they called in police, and there were big protests. Now they've actually deployed military. So I'm curious if either of you wants to jump in with your thoughts on mandates. What would happen if they came here, if you're for or against them?
Look, there are elements of mandates that I can agree with. We've already set standards for other things like the MMR vaccine, very basic standard vaccines that we expect everyone to get before they can go to school, travel. And I think for the most part that's worked. We've eradicated plagues from the world. I think we should be proud of that. With regards to COVID, since this is an ongoing pandemic, we need to focus on approaches that are effective and that don't ostracize or exacerbate tensions. With regard to the Australian situation, it's not something I'm extensively familiar with, but generally speaking, I don't think that cracking down on protests is going to be an effective way to incentivize people to get vaccinated. What's happening in New York might be, but my main issue with it is that I'm not entirely sure how they expect people to still have their vaccination card. I know that there's been some confusion from the beginning as to whether or not you should keep that. I know people have thrown theirs away. They made it too big for wallets. It just felt a little bit haphazardly planned from the forego, so that's unfortunate. Maybe they can find other ways to incentivize it, like, for example, in schools, where they have a direct access to government records where they wouldn't have to use those little cards, That might be a little bit better. I guess we'll have to see.
Well, I'm not saying you believe this, but some people on the left, I never want to hear about the discussion of voter ID ever again. Because now you can force people to identify their medical history to try to get into a restaurant in New York City. Yeah, look, I'm not getting the vaccine, so I'm part of the 100 million people that are unvaccinated. And it's an experimental vaccine. The FDA and CDC has said that in January. It's questionably effective. Lindsey Graham just came down with COVID. You had a ship in United Kingdom, 100% vaccinated ship that came down with COVID. It's more like a treatment than a vaccine. I'll leave that conversation to Dr. Brett Weinstein and the people that really understand how that works. But yeah, this is medical apartheid. This is trying to create a two-tiered system where if you don't make the proper medical decisions, you're not able to go to Broadway shows or go into restaurants, even when the efficacy of this vaccine is questionable at best. We see that in Israel, an 85% vaccinated
That is a
country
blatant lie,
that's about
Tim.
to lock down again. And
Or is
most
that
of the
c-
new
or is that
cases are from
Kirk
vaccinated patients, not unvaccinated patients in Israel.
Oh, that's Kirk saying
So,
that.
sorry,
Yeah, no. What
interject.
you're saying is a
Yeah,
blatant
Yeah,
lie.
obviously against mandates, and I think
I-
people should be able to make their own medical decisions. I think it's pretty obvious.
Well, I disagree. I think we actually have a story we wrote on timcast.com that our view of the lockdowns is that it's alarmism because a new study from the Public Health of England found the Pfizer vaccine is 96% effective after 2 doses at staving off the Delta variant, and AstraZeneca was 92%.
I can probably agree it's alarmism, but it's enough of an alarm for the public health leaders to undermine the argument that the vaccine is a solution to what would possibly satisfy the public.
So-
I mean, I was against the lockdowns in the first place. Let me be very clear when there was 1,000 deaths a day, not 334. But sorry, go ahead.
Well, a couple of points on this. First of all, it's experimental in the sense that there was an expedited process for its release, but there have been full and extensive studies taken on the safety and effectiveness of these vaccines. The reason why the FDA study hasn't been finished, the reason why it hasn't been fully vetted, isn't because they're looking for long-term health effects, it's because they're determining the extent to which it protects you over a long period of time. Ergo, the fact of the matter is, by all available data, this is undeniably much safer to get the vaccine. I mean, by orders of magnitude.
let me ask you a question.
Well, wait, a couple things, because you said a few things there. There are some instances where areas have more people being infected if they're already vaccinated. But if you take a look at, this is like data mining. if you take a look at the broader statistics, especially here in America, the number of people who have gotten breakthrough cases is something like 0.003% of people who have been vaccinated. You can take a look at the numbers. Where is this new wave exploding? It's in the unvaccinated. In spite of the fact that fewer and fewer people are remaining unvaccinated, the vaccinated stay relatively healthy. And not only do they get infected way less often, they also suffer far fewer severe symptoms. Their hospitalization rates have plummeted, and their deaths are incredibly low compared to people who are unvaccinated. This is by all means an effective vaccine.
What's your opinion of Johnson & Johnson, the FDA saying that it might cause a rare nerve disease?
That's something that, first of all, when you take a look at that, you have to recognize that even if that was the case.
Which the FDA says it is.
Right, well, they're looking into it, of course. It
No,
does seem-
they issued an official warning that it could issue a rare nerve disease. That's a big deal.
Could issue, of course. They're looking into it, and that is something to look into and to be concerned about.
What's your opinion of VAERS, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System?
Hold on.
Where
Let's-
there's over,
let's- let's-
first,
No, I'm just curious because
Let's do the Guillain-Barré syndrome,
Yeah.
though. I think you want to.
Yeah, so of course, stuff like that can happen. Now, even if that claim is the case, it would remain the fact that unless the extent of that potential nerve damage is just apocalyptically severe, that the effects of getting COVID would still be far, far worse than the potential side effects of that vaccine. However, if you were to say, let's say worst case, Johnson & Johnson, it's not viable, that gets pulled, we see what the consequences are, that doesn't really speak against the greater viability of the vaccines. I got Pfizer, for example. We're talking hundreds of millions of people who have either been protected against the vaccine in part, or if they get it, against the virus, or if they get it, their effects, their symptoms are much, much, much more manageable.
So I just want to just play into the irony here that I'm the one criticizing the pharmaceutical companies and you're the one defending. I just think I think it's delicious.
Hold on. That's an extremely dishonest talking point.
Well, because you're peddling the
praising-
Pfizer vaccine. You're saying
not-
it's so effective. So many
wait,
people
hold on,
have taken
hold on,
it.
wait.
And I'm the one saying, hold on, maybe AstraZeneca, Moderna,
Charlie.
Johnson & Johnson, and Pfizer.
This is
Let's talk about the points he's made. And
No, I was just enjoying the irony. That's all.
the thing is, it's not really like irony if you understand the issue at hand. See, my praise doesn't go to the pharmaceutical companies or their CEOs. It goes to the tireless workers who spent months and months and months developing these vaccines.
Who's getting rich
very big
from
fan.
this vaccine?
Well, hold on. Have I at any point praised the distribution or profiteering system?
Who do you think
behind
gets rich
Pfizer?
from vaccine mandates? The workers or the Pfizer CEO?
Nobody's talking about who gets rich. This is a toothless.
Isn't that your whole
hold on.
shtick?
This is a
Like,
toothless
workers'
critique
rights.
that you could.
Charlie,
let's try and go back and forth. Then.
This is a toothless critique that you could apply to literally anything that you don't like. Everything in this country is manufactured to the profit
No,
of
but
CEOs.
we don't mandate it, and so you can't go to restaurants if you don't get one of
Yeah,
four
so-
major
but if you're-
pharmaceutical
so let me-
medicines.
So wait, I just want to say, if that's your criticism,
That's one
then-
of many.
Then you
Just-
should. So if that's the criticism you want to focus on, I'm in favor of nationalizing the pharmaceutical industry. I'm willing to take it that far. But whether or not that's on the table, and I can't just make that happen, when we're talking strictly about the effectiveness of the vaccine, it seems to be effective.
let's
That's not
talk-
a praise of the capitalist industry behind
No,
it.
I was just enjoying the irony. That's
It's
all.
not irony,
Well, it's
Charlie.
totally ironic because I'm the one saying that they might be lying to us, and you're the one that's saying it's super effective.
Wait, what
Which
lie?
usually, if we were wearing our traditional uniforms, right versus left, it would be the other way around. That's all I'm saying.
The only comment
But
I'm making
what
is
do you
as
have to
the
say about
effectiveness of
VAERS,
the
though? What do you have
vaccine.
to say about the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System that says, well, over 7,000 people experienced death after getting the vaccine? Does that worry you?
The VAERS system is entirely self-reported. I don't think it's generally used
Do you think
to
it's
form accurate
underreported
metric.
or overreported?
With VAERS, it's almost impossible to say. You know what VAERS is, right? Can you tell me what VAERS
Yeah,
is?
VAERS is a government website that physicians or individuals can submit complaints or concerns after an adverse event report from a vaccine. Since you cannot win in court against a vaccine production company, then they go through some process where the government then can distribute some form of remedy if you had an adverse event reaction.
All right,
That's what VAERS is.
And researchers like it because if you take a vaccine or you get some other procedure, any medical drug done, you can report the effects there, and it can be a way of gathering sort of aggregate data concerning the effects of these potential treatments. The problem is researchers don't use this as a bulletproof way of determining the outcome or effect of anything because they're literally just unvetted online submissions that anybody can put in.
So I
I
agree.
ask you because I want to know. How do you arrive at the conclusion that how many people did you say
Well,
applied?
it's VAERS' own data is 7,000 plus, and most of which, by the way,
That anyone can submit.
no,
I'm asking
by
how
the way,
do you
most of
arrive-
which are physicians submitted. Just so you know, these
the
are
total number.
the most of the submissions on the VAERS website are done by like family doctors or local physicians. So I'm just asking, what number of adverse event reactions would you say maybe there's something wrong?
But I'm asking,
10,000 deaths.
How do you know these deaths were caused by
20,000 deaths?
vaccines?
No, I'm just saying that's what VAERS says, right?
No, wait, but so I need to know this.
We
because
don't.
You can, so
That's the
VAERS
question.
So wait, is these just people who have died after taking the vaccine? Like they may have died from some medical incident afterwards, and it just gets put up there. And
This is the question.
Because
Usually,
the
a vaccine gets pulled when you have 15 attributable deaths. We have 7,000 that we have to go through. The question is, when do you call time out and say maybe we should
You're not answering the
mandate
question.
it?
How do you know that they're from the vaccine?
We don't. That's the point.
Oh,
but you
okay.
don't either. But the position is, let's mandate experimental medicine. We don't know actually what's happening.
If you don't know, then how can you say that medical doctors are the one uploading this information? Is there
because
any methodology you're
we
looking at
we
to
do
determine
know
these
who's
deaths were
actually
from it?
uploading it. We
I
know
like how
that.
Charlie
We know
Kirk
the
is
entries
trying
are
to go
usually and typically
hard
conditionally.
right at the
How
start
about
because it's
menstrual
really
cycle
undercutting
disruption,
his point.
Loss of nerve
It's like, what the
capacity,
heck?
unable to walk, paralysis, miscarriages,
Charlie Kirk, you are literally
mood changes. Also, you can go through the VAERS
going
database.
in
That's
hard on the
interesting.
lies
Mood
right
changes.
off the
But
bat.
what about the death?
Let me
really-
interject
Death
something
is
real quick.
7,000 plus. That's a serious
really
number.
How do they know
making
it's from a
Vosh look
vaccine?
even
I
better
keep
than
asking
he
you
is.
this. You don't
Vosh
Let
is
me,
a
let me
really good
address 2
debater,
points,
don't get
one
me
from
wrong.
each of you real quick.
Hi,
We can
Krotos.
try and,
Like
how do we know it's from the vaccine?
Charlie Kirk
It's
here
a
is
difficult
literally
question.
lying
I
through
would
his
say
teeth
that if you have a mass vaccination program
and
which
going
gives out 330 million
above
doses
and
or so,
beyond
and then people start
to
saying,
lie
"Hey, I got the vaccine,"
and
then this
failing
happened.
miserably.
Theirs isn't
Hello,
here to
Krotos,
say
by the
it
way.
is or isn't.
If
They're
I
here to
didn't
say,
already
can we
say it,
find
I'm
a
sorry.
pattern in this? And I think
trying
7,000
to-
suggests there may be one at the very least. I'm not a scientist, so I can't stress that. I will also say, however, to Charlie, Guillain-Barré syndrome, which I'm probably pronouncing wrong, it's a side
I
effect. of-
always mispronounce it.
Yeah, me too.
Guillain-Barré.
Guillain-Barré.
Yeah.
Barre. There you go.
Yeah, something like that.
My understanding is actually a side effect of many vaccines.
Yeah, it is.
And so,
Totally, that's correct. It could be.
well, so the issue I have is one of the things that Vosh brought up is that there's been, how many you mentioned, 100 million, 160 million?
In the
115, I think it is, million.
who have been fully vaccinated?
Fully vaccinated.
I think in that ballpark.
So
Maybe a
of
bit
course, you know, if you have something very different from any other vaccination we normally do, because
Yeah.
we're not having everyone do it all at once.
Yeah, and so this is a mass inoculation thing. And so here's why the American system should answer this question easily. When you have any sort of uncertainty or disagreement, yield to rights.
So
Yield to rights. Allow
Well,
people
so-
to say no. Let me just build out the argument, right? So for me, for example, I'm 27. I don't consider COVID to be a largely disproportionate risk to my way of life. I don't know about this vaccine. I have gotten other vaccines in my life. So I want to be able to have the right to say no to that. So the American system, Constitution, kind of like the tradition, is to be able to have people have nuance, preferences, and individualism. When it comes to these sort of complex issues, not saying you can't go to a restaurant because we want you to take experimental medicine.
Right. So a couple of points on that. First of all, if we're speaking to legal rights, the Supreme Court found over a century ago that when it came to vaccinations, this was a special exemption from some people's rights to.
I will
determine
agree
their
with you
medical
that the
histories.
courts
It's
are not on my side.
1904 in that one. And there's a reason why. Because, of course, when you choose not to take the vaccine, you contribute to the removal of others' freedoms. See, it's true. You do have a freedom to not or to take a vaccine, but I think other people should have the freedom to not grow up in a world ridden by plague. And with the way this disease, COVID, mutates with time, as all diseases do, inevitably, if it continues to circle the world long enough, and this is an international problem, not just an American one, new strains will develop, which will slowly ebb at the effectiveness of this set of vaccines. So it threatens all of us. May I say one other thing?
Yeah,
No,
of course.
Sorry. With all of that being said, just to speak to VARS, VARS is an incredibly effective system for locating and roughly attributing concerns related to the effects of drugs. The problem is that there are several elements to this disease that make it really difficult to pinpoint anything specific. The two of which being A, hundreds of millions of people vaccinated. That is a huge range to pull data from. And B, the propagandist fear campaign about an incredibly effective vaccine process that may lead people to misattribute
I just want to get a
deaths
quick
that they
clarification.
experience
Yeah.
to vaccines.
Sorry.
But just quick clarification. Are you for mandating the COVID-19 vaccine?
The same way we have other vaccines, like school, travel, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
So, like, what if someone wanted to go to a restaurant or a supermarket or a movie theater?
I think that, we don't have that for other vaccines, right? Like
Right.
every time you go to a movie theater, you have a little card. I understand that might be an effective panic measure, but long term, my goal would be to integrate it into the same revenue of vaccines.
I think that's a more reasonable response than some politicians. I'm just going to be honest.
People
That's-
are panicking. And
No, I
they
think that's a
should.
more
People die.
well. Yeah.
I just want to make sure we
Right.
weren't having, like, misunderstanding.
No, I
over
think that's
whether-
more of a reasonable answer. I just just curious, just on the vaccine topic in general, are you concerned by like Dr. Malone coming out, who literally invented the mRNA vaccine and says that there's a dangerous spike protein involved, and he encourages people to think twice before getting it? Does that move you at all?
Well, you're free to speak with your doctor when it comes to
no, Dr. Malone, just his specific commentary. The guy who invented this type of vaccine.
Well, I'm not a PhD, and I doubt that he was directly involved in the production of these vaccines.
No, he literally invented this type
the
of
mRNA,
vaccine.
but with the like Johnson & Johnson, the Pfizer, the Moderna.
But he's very, very aware of the sort
Johnson
of
& Johnson is
accelerated
not
implementation. He's trying to call
mRNA.
time out and tell people this is not like any other vaccine.
Johnson & Johnson.
His claim is that it involves a spike protein.
Is
It was
the
rushed to
vaccine
market. It's going to have side
he is
effects.
related to.
You don't understand it like I did. I invented this, and you got to think twice before mandating it or even taking it if you're under a certain age. Does that bother you?
What makes the current retinue of vaccines that we take, the mRNA process, different from other mRNA
It doesn't involve the
vaccines?
spike protein. According to him, the same composition as like the measles, mumps, rubella type vaccine or the chickenpox vaccine.
Well, those weren't mRNA. The process wasn't developed back during the MMR vaccine.
Totally, but some of them are getting updated for the more mRNA type technology,
But
right?
if he wasn't involved in the production of these modern vaccines, how could he possibly have any comment on any of the rigors or tests that were done
Because he
before?
invented this type of vaccine. I'm just saying,
But
does that bother you? Do you
Well,
think he's just like a fear propagandist and like?
No, he may well have concerns, but those are concerns that I would rather have addressed by the scientific community rather than, with respect to you and myself, YouTubers.
Well, no, I agree. So, but the question is which scientists, right? So there's a lot of scientists speaking out against this. Dr. Brett Weinstein, Dr. Malone.
What
right?
is Dr. Brett Weinstein's
He's an
specialty?
evolutionary biologist, so he knows a little bit about how
That's not virology.
cellular
No,
function works.
that is not virology.
let-
that is a completely spurious
So let me just,
association.
do you trust Fauci more or Dr. Brett Weinstein?
It's not about Fauci. It's about Fauci.
He's a virologist who's been
Wait,
wrong
wait.
about everything.
It's about
Well,
the
let's-
global. Well, hold on. He's smiling with glee here. It's the global medical community in this regard.
Who are,
Let's-
you mean
hold
like
on,
you mean like
really-
the WHO? Like
So- no,
I mean,
not. Hold on. Wait.
Put
please,
a name
please.
behind it.
He's,
though.
wait. He's very excited to interrupt me.
Yeah, let's-
No,
let's-
I just want to say it's not just about the WHO. We're talking about a unified effort on the part of virtually every country on Earth to get a hold of the vaccines that us Americans are privileged to have. This isn't just some. This isn't some like pharmaceutical Dr. Fauci push that wasn't broadly supported by any of the relevant experts in the mRNA field, which is not huge because it's a very new development. Internationally, there is a demand for these vaccines.
I wanted to add, just based on what you had said, I can pull up Reuters. Their fact check is that vaccines are not, quote, cytotoxic. They go on to mention that Robert Malone, and they show the Brett Weinstein podcast, they show the post, the FDA was alerted months ago that the spike protein in the COVID vaccines are cytotoxic, toxic to cells. The FDA did nothing. Reuters says this is not true. Now, the issue at hand is trust. Like you mentioned, you said, do you trust Fauci or Weinstein? I don't know if there is a fact-based argument if you have the doctors you trust and the doctors you trust or the organizations you trust. It's a clash of who you believe, to be
Well,
honest.
none of us have the credentials to just come up with these arguments on their own. There will always be bias in who we choose to believe. However, given the plurality of people seem to support the safety and the effectiveness of the vaccine, and the fact that it doesn't take a virologist to notice that over 500,000 Americans have died of COVID, more than the combined death tolls of every war since World War I combined, including the Second World War in Vietnam. Those are things that I don't need to be a virologist to see. I can see it
can I ask you a
happening.
question,
That's
though?
pretty bad.
One of the issues that's brought up frequently, especially on Twitter, is that many of these COVID deaths are died with COVID, as it's brought up, where people would say something like it tends to be people who are over 70 or things like that. I'm only bringing that up not to make the argument, but because you said, how would VAERS know if these are actually related to the vaccine?
I'd love to respond to that if I may.
Yeah, absolutely.
So COVID rarely, directly kills you. Like age, it causes a breakdown in other vital functions that then their death can be attributed as such. So,
Yep.
for example, of the many things that people die, it's not really COVID. It's just that COVID blanks their entire system internally, and eventually something fails, something breaks, and they die. There were people claiming that there were deaths being spuriously attributed to COVID-19 very early on in this pandemic, but thankfully we know that's not the case, because if you take a look at the excess mortality numbers, the number of people who should die every year in the United States, because there's a very normal pattern, normally with this many people in this country, we see an excess, starting when COVID started, that almost perfectly graphs on to the rising death waves of COVID. I mean, it perfectly tracks onto that.
I just want to say for you, Charlie, I think, the issue I see here is, for me, it's I can't trust or distrust. I don't know. I think Brett Weinstein's a very smart guy, and I don't think he's going to lie to me. And these doctors are very smart people. And then I see the government agencies that, I don't always trust the government, to be completely honest. I'm not a big fan. But to believe that there's like a nefarious effort or anything like that, ultimately what it comes down to is, in my opinion, having a trusted medical professional that you can consult with.
Well, I totally agree. And I think there could be an argument that if you're over the age of 70, that this vaccine might be a really good idea for you. However, to mandate it for schools and for colleges, when these are highly complex medical decisions, that's where I'm going to push back against
more
it.
ingredients.
Well,
It's
real
rather
quick,
complex
let me
medical
point
They are
out, though,
complex
the
medical
Johnson &
decisions.
Johnson vaccine is not an mRNA vaccine, though. Is that's my understanding?
I
It's an
don't want to
MMR?
speak out of turn.
I believe so.
Yeah, I
I would
think
love to be
that's right.
fact checked on that.
I'm not totally sure.
My memory is
So
faulty.
I guess another question I have: what do you think of alternative type treatments, hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin? Why the push for mass inoculation?
Well, because hydroxychloroquine studies have found it largely ineffective. There was, I believe, a French study that stopped when people started dying of heart failure. I think the only reason the right dies in this hill is because Trump mentioned it. I don't think there'd be a push for it otherwise. The vaccines are the effective way of getting mass populations inoculated. And while it is true that most of the people who die are ancient, the fact remains that people experience long-term side effects from getting COVID, even if they survive. I know people who are in their 30s, and me, a blistering 27-year-old myself, I'm not especially worried, but I've heard them talk about how much harder it is for them to climb up flights of stairs. I know that erectile dysfunction, fellas, is one of the listed potential side effects of getting COVID, even young, healthy, no other problems. It is true that death is most comorbid with age and pre-existing conditions, but still. And that's not even to speak of the COVID variants. I mean, right now we're on, Delta? But if it keeps cycling around the world, let it go for another year. Who knows how bad this could get?
So Johnson & Johnson is not an mRNA vaccine. So there's an alternative to mRNA if you're concerned about it.
And there was some guidance with the nerve disease with that. Sorry to interrupt.
I do think we kind of overlooked something really interesting is that when did we mandate vaccinations in public schools?
Well, I know the Supreme Court case concerning this was in 1904.
Yeah.
So I would know it would have to have been earlier than that. I know that Washington even had his troops vaccinated, though I
For
forget.
smallpox.
Yeah.
Smallpox, was it?
Yeah.
Which is pretty crazy to think
Inoculated, not vac. Yeah, you're right.
about. Right. I don't know what they did, hit people with a rock and then
It was
pour
like
liquid
a
in.
needle, I think.
It was-
and they would
yeah.
prick you with the needle that had like a weakened sample or something.
And they would have had to forge that needle, like with a blacksmith. Isn't that crazy to think about? Like Washington's
I know, like someone pouring it and then
Yeah.
today it's just a machine that makes it.
It's just wild to think about.
Well, so, man, I think the real issue for the most part is just mandatory.
Well, I just also have another question. Do you think that there might be any bad motives behind these four companies, AstraZeneca, Moderna, Pfizer, and Johnson & Johnson, considering they are big pharma and they pursue profits, which generally, as a libertarian socialist, you're skeptical of? Do you think maybe they might have nefarious motives?
Oh, their intentions are reprehensible. They have for many years made money off the backs of American deaths. The opioid crisis is almost entirely attributable to the
And the
malfeasance.
Sackler family.
Yeah, I mean, no moral love for these companies. If this could be, and by the way, the mRNA process was developed through public funding. It was, an effort invested in by the collective good, something I'm generally supportive of. When it comes to these companies themselves, and when I say, go get your Pfizer vaccine, whatever, please do not mistake this or anything else that I say for an endorsement of the practices of these companies. It is only through cruel twist of fate and the economic system we live in that they are the ones put in a position to handle this. But it was the workers at those companies, not the CEOs, who did the work.
I'm just curious, does that ever make you stop short and say, maybe they're trying to massively inoculate us on a vaccine that might not be as effective to try to pursue profit, not well-being? Does that ever enter into your
It's a
kind of
consideration.
calculation?
It's a consideration you should take about anything produced by any company that's run for profit, which is everything. Basically every need in American society is tempered by the knowledge that there are people out there who are paid very large salaries to sell it to you. This is the case for everything we do, everything we eat. Every time you run down Main Street, or in my case, I guess, the boulevards in Los Angeles, you're seeing the protracted efforts of $1 billion industry to make sure you want things they're selling. Could that be the case for COVID? Undeniably, there was a profit incentive involved. Oh my goodness, I'm sorry. And there was probably a protracted effort on the part of these companies to make sure they were the first, and they probably took every dirty advantage they could
What
get.
if the-
But
So- yeah,
with the data available, I have to still, much as I would say, hey, I would prefer eating McDonald's food to starvation, I have to say this is probably still something we should be doing.
Do you want to do? I don't want to stand. It's been 20 minutes.
No,
so
for
do you
sure.
Wanna, do you want to make a final point?
Maybe you would starve instead
I
of
actually
McDonald's,
think
I
this
don't
has
know.
been really constructive and not like that, inflammatory. I think that deep down you have this kind of, urge that I'm already there, where maybe they want this thing to go on for another decade to go make another $100 billion. And maybe the cheap drug of hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin might work better than they might think.
I don't have that urge.
Other
Yeah,
studies
no,
would disagree
Vosh
with you
doesn't.
Earlier. We could change the topic. I just think it's
So
that was a healthy discourse.
Can I meet in the middle on that one, on that very last one?
Yeah.
I do not trust the pharmaceutical industries, though the available evidence does seem to point to the effectiveness of the vaccines. I say this, nationalize the pharma industry. Seriously. It could be used for the collective good, and I would unironically actually trust it more in the hands of our ineffective, bloated government than I would the sociopaths who run it currently. And
So
I mean that.
I'll wrap this up by saying, always talk to your doctor. This is one of the biggest things. Like YouTube is very strict on this, especially. But I genuinely think this is the right answer. If you're watching this, don't assume anyone here is right or wrong. I mean, I'm sure there are people who think Charlie's made a bunch of good points, and you have. Ultimately, it's down between you and your doctor. And I'll stress, for whatever your opinion, Charlie, I understand. Hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin haven't been approved by the FDA, and so that's just another.
We're just asking questions whether it works or not.
So that's why I think it's really important, because I think there are. I got to be honest. In regards to ivermectin, people have been eating horse paste that they sell. I looked up what the FDA says about it. They say do not do this, and they actually give a very good reason. They say, although people are claiming that if an animal can take it, someone else can. That's not true. There's some things that dogs can't have that humans can. Right. So please talk to your doctor, and I definitely hope we can continue having debates about this stuff, because that was vastly important. I'm really glad you guys were able to have that conversation.
I hadn't even heard of the horse paste thing. That's
Yes.
horrifying.
Ivermectin is technically a drug for horses. It's off-label use.
Oh.
Yeah, it's a dewormer. And so you can go to like Tractor Supply, and they have a sign that says like, "Do not eat this," and please.
Any drug for horses will burn a human out from the inside. Those things are you're bending a horse. They're titans. They're like.
So let's talk about the other big topic, critical race theory. That's the one that I had a terrible answer, absolutely, when you asked me about it. And it was because I think my approach to it was too surface level cultural. So the last time we had Vosh on, when you asked me about it, I couldn't give you a good answer. And I think we can talk about what's happening in schools, the things they're teaching children, and I don't know if either of you has an opinion and wants to start off with.
Floor is yours.
Yeah, so there are two CRTs. There's the critical race theory that I know of, which is a highly esoteric, essentially elective class that you can take in some law schools that teaches you a variety of incredibly eclectic legal theories some of which I like and some of which I think I disagree with. And then there's the critical race theory that people like Christopher Rufo have been trying to push, a sort of catch-all term to describe all anti-racism. We see these anti-CRT bills being put through state legislators, and a lot of them don't even mention critical race theory. They mention stuff that's been boilerplate anti-racist theory for like 2 centuries. That stuff really concerns me. If I think that academia is to an extent sacred. Of course, all the good things in our society now were born in the halls of academia. The Enlightenment, our democracy, the fair trial that we enjoy if we're arrested, these were things that were originally considered to be the crackpot initiatives of academics, and only through the respect of those ideas have we arrived at what we have today. So if there are problems within academia, I would have them solved in academia, not through the big hand of government reaching in and censoring everyone who says something that disagrees with some political party.
So a point of clarification, you don't believe that critical race theory is in schools?
I think that maybe there are ideas which overlap with critical race theory, but there's always going to be overlap between academic ideas. I mean, I drank water, so did Hitler, one of those type situations.
I think you're coming at it from in good faith, where you're technically correct here that the super academic way of defining critical race theory is not being taught to 4th graders, right? With that being
hope so. It'd be pretty
with
tough
that
for
being
them.
said, it's almost like saying, we're not teaching advanced geometry to 4th graders, but we are teaching them, very basic math, right? We'll get them the Euclidean geometry. So the very basics of this are definitely in schools. And there's many examples of this, right? The National Education Association literally came out in their press release and said that they are going to push for, and their word was critical race theory, just so we're clear. They use that term, right? That's not Christopher Rufo, that's not James Lindsay, who are good friends of mine. That's the National Education Association, right? And I think they might even be talking about something different than the Delgado theory of critical race theory, right? And so what I want to try to do here, Tim, is we can talk about critical race theory as an academic theory, or we could use a filler term like wokeism, which is more like racial justice, which I actually think would probably be, we can call it racial justice and meet in the middle, right?
I really feel like there are probably 4-digit number of people in America who are studied on actual critical race theory,
and
not
I'm,
including myself.
And
by the way.
I'm not even prepared to do that. But I'm happy to talk about racial justice education and wokeism, which I think
This is
I
what the
think-
discourse is centered on.
Well, I think you guys actually agree, in essence, that the academic critical race theory there's overlap with a component in schools, but what we often hear is someone will say critical race theory is being taught to my kids, and then someone will say cite one author of critical race theory that we've brought up in school. And the issue is we refer to it as I believe it's called critical race praxis.
Mm-hmm.
So this is something different than critical race theory. It's being implemented in education. But that's why you said wokeism, and
well,
you
and
said
I just think that discussion is so unhelpful when Joy Reid and Christopher Rufo are screaming at each other, and Joy Reid is saying, like, it's not being taught anywhere, Christopher Rufo, so yes, it is, when in reality they're both right. They're just talking about two completely different things.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
No, I do. And Christopher Rufo has admitted this is like a kind of tactic. Critical race theory does sound spooky. You know, I get a little shiver when I say it. Whereas stuff like anti-racist theory or structural racism maybe compel a little bit more thought when discussed on. It's kind of a moral panic that, in principle, I really disagree with. But if you want to talk, I mean, we can call it wokeism if you want. That's probably a more accurate term.
Yeah. I will just say, to the point about Christopher Rufo, white supremacist is also used as a catch-all term in the other direction.
If we're talking, I mean,
Not
in
exactly.
academia, the term white supremacist is virtually never used. It's sort of a common parlance.
What I will say, though, about to give credit to Christopher Rufo is that this is all kind of downstream from the conversation that Marcuse and Delgado started.
Yeah, well,
it really is.
Well, let's talk about it then. But just one thing, though, since we're operating under the blanket wokeism, which is really broad term, let's talk about like specific ideas, because I'm sure there are some of them that I can provide a good defense for, and some of them
so
I
like
might
how about like
disagree with.
black-only dormitories?
Generally, not a fan. I think that I don't think they're like explicitly harmful in the same way that traditional segregation is, but I also think that it incentivizes bad types of socialization, where the way that you get a reprieve from the faults of society is to find comfort in people of your own race. Maybe that incentivizes some bad stuff. In my university, we had safe spaces, but you know what they were? They were like chilled, like coffee break rooms behind like
Where'd
the
you go?
Latin. I went to Humboldt State.
Okay.
And right behind there, and like anyone could go in there, whatever. Just the only thing that they asked was that you not be like a dick. But as long as you met that qualification, that was fine. That, to me, that's a good safe space. Maybe that works, you know?
So just happy to go through more.
Go for it, please.
Yeah,
No,
so
hit me. Throw me.
I think this is actually really helpful. So how about reparations for slavery?
I think I'm pretty in favor of that, yeah.
Okay.
It's
Make the argument.
It's just an owed debt. We said 40 acres and a mule. We never paid it. And unfortunately, the material reality for a lot of people who were slaves didn't change that much after they were emancipated. I mean, if you were a slave and you're made free, that's a big step up, don't get me wrong, but you have nothing. I mean, nothing. And because of the way generational wealth transfers from father to son or mother to either to anyone to their children, caught me there. Unfortunately, we still see the consequences of that borne out. You can actually look county by county. Where were slaves kept? Which were the plantation counties? And you see, this group of black like neighborhoods, that's where they settled after slavery ended. It's like really immediate stuff, and it's a debt owed that this nation never paid.
I don't necessarily agree on reparations, but I think we need to clarify what that ultimately means. But I will say I've long held the same position. I actually worked on a documentary. There's an issue of people who were enslaved, then they were released, and they were not given any means to actually develop and grow. And so there's a generational wealth gap between people based on race for these historical reasons. The challenge I see, I suppose, is, we've done a lot to amend the laws and change them. For instance, redlining and blockbusting have become illegal, and now we're dealing with an ultimately, I believe, is a class issue. Of course, racism still exists. But anyway, I digress on that point. What I wanted to get to is specifically on
the
reparations.
reason that the class issue persists is because of the racism.
Reparations
though.
as?
That's
More
what the
important.
systemic
So
part of
this is a
systemic
big
racism
divide.
is.
Some people think like cash payments. I'm not a big fan of that. It doesn't fix the problem, for one. It's if you can put money into that community, but there's been research done on how long a dollar stays in a black neighborhood as opposed to a white neighborhood. And if a black neighborhood, all of the businesses are owned by corporate boards that are all majority white, eventually the money filters out, and you get a very temporary boost in living situation. Not much long-term structural change. I'm a big fan of structural reparations, not based on race, but rather based on targeting neighborhoods that need it the most. Some of these neighborhoods are like white. I passed through some of them on my way out from Ronald Reagan Airport. I can tell which parts of this country. You can see it in the bones of the neighborhood. And I think that a new proper reparations project, a new New Deal even, would go a long way. Get some
Well, so
war
you're
crews
saying
out
not even
there.
based on race.
I think that we should recognize that this is largely a racial project because, unfortunately, poverty and race are really intertwined in this country. But in terms of applying it, I think that it would be much more healthy if we treated it like a collective effort to bring up the lowest sort of echelon of our economic.
So I want to ask you,
Yes.
Charlie, would you agree with a program that was in how do I describe this? Explained as reparations, but was not based on race, went to people based on class and neighborhood, so that it could help Latinos and white people and Asians and everybody.
First of all, I'm against reparations. I just don't like the word because it kind of implies this intergenerational type guilt.
But that's because
or
it is
allowance
an
that I kind of
intergenerational
reject,
problem.
and I'm happy to build that out further. Do I agree that the question is mostly class? Oh, absolutely. And I think that Vaush is hitting on something, and I think that you're saying that it's inherently racial. I really want to explore that with you because I think that's interesting. I think you're wrong, but I think that's interesting, where I think the racial thing is actually being used to distract people like you and I from actually talking about what's really happening here, which is a small group of people getting a lot richer while normal people get poor. And I think the racial thing is being used as this distraction tool to throw smokescreen in the middle while we're talking
It's
about
not
something
a
that
distraction
we're never really
thing.
going to have
Like,
consensus on. when
one
the true
causes
struggle
the
right now is
other,
mainly
which then
economic.
causes the other.
Yeah,
It's a chicken and the
I
egg
think
problem.
That applying
You can't-
reparations
it's
along
not a
racial
smokescreen.
lines runs into a
It's
bunch of really tough issues.
inherent
Which
problem
neighborhoods?
in how
do you
our
go by
world
like
works right
blood? Like, can you prove your great grandfather was a slave? It gets very difficult very quickly. Maybe that would be the most direct interpretation of generational reparations. But in my mind, the reason why it's important to recognize the racial issue here is that the nature of class divides in this country is cut into racial policy prior to the Civil Rights Act. The redlining that took place, lines which still remain not in law but in practice, led to very distinct. I mean, sometimes one side of the highway is nice and the other side of the highway, I mean, it legitimately.
Can I
looks
just
like
jump in real quick?
Uh-huh.
I'm from Chicago. 47th Street was split by race. No joke. This is long-standing effects on the city. Just to point out.
No, and I grew up in L.A. and on either side of the 5, which cut through the city. I mean, or the 405. Sorry.
Let me
right
just
there.
interject something too, and I don't know if you're familiar. We were actually told that we would be arrested from the south side of 47th if we crossed 47th. We would get arrested because the cops would pull up and say, "You don't live in this neighborhood. What are you doing here?"
I'm from the suburbs of Chicago, so I've heard stories like that. I mean, like, it's very,
No,
I'm very clear to say I'm not from Chicago.
I grew up in Beverly Hills, which is close though to West Hollywood and Koreatown, and the lines are clear as day. The reason I say that though about like the racial project is that because explicit discrimination is no longer in the law, we've pretty much wiped that out, with the exception of some, I guess, edge cases. The project of systemic racism, or the existence of systemic racism, is something which is carried through class by inertia. It isn't something you can explicitly legislate along
8.
anymore. I mean, obviously,
Level
nobody's out there
16
passing laws like
artifacts.
black people can't do this. That'd be silly. But instead, the consequences of slavery and of second-class citizenship for black people left unaddressed, a wound left to fester that, unfortunately, can't really heal itself inertially unless we do something specific.
So the issue with that argument is that the more that we intervened in the black community, it actually had the opposite effect. And Thomas Sowell probably has done the best research and literature on this. You can laugh all you want. He's got a lot of credentials.
I wasn't trying to besmirch.
He's a very thoughtful thinker, and he actually lived through this, right? He lived through the black renaissance in the 40s and the 50s, where redlining was a legitimate problem. So was yellow lining, by the way, against Italians and against Jews. Nowhere nearly as bad, but there were other degrees of discrimination based on ethnicity and cultural background. And the black community, especially, the area really well in the south of Chicago, right near the Chicago stockyards, the black community almost had this rallying cry where they were being discriminated against everywhere, and they kind of collectivized their purchasing power, and they saw their incomes increase actually at a higher rate than white Americans in the 40s and 50s and early 60s. You've heard this argument many times, and you probably disagree with it, but it's just true, is that the moment that we all of a sudden de-emphasized fathers being in the home and subsidized fatherlessness, we saw all these other trends increase. So
Also a
in the
lie.
right before the Civil Rights Act passed, about 24%
Charlie
of
Kirk's
black
still lying.
children
We're crying
were
out loud.
born without a father. Now it's upwards of 70%. You guys can look at the Washington Examiner. It's 77%. Let's say it's 65%. So something has to explain that 40-point increase.
May I?
Yeah, just let me finish.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily that America got more racist. It could be the cocaine thing, which, is a common issue. It could be, operations of all these things. But a 40-point increase, I would point to a culture of fatherlessness, really bad government-run public schools, and then subsidizing behavior that isn't good.
So there are a few things that I can agree with you on. First of all, having two people in your house to raise you is pretty much essential. You absolutely
Glad
need
we
to.
agree.
This is undeniable. While I don't believe in shaming single parents, even if their single parentedness is a
I agree
product
with
of
that.
bad decision making, it's still good. You need in this economy, one parent, honestly.
Yeah.
But with that being said, there has been research shown that the rate of black fatherlessness is somewhat over-exaggerated, in large part because that number only applies to married fathers, so husbands raising their children. It turns out when you account for unmarried black couples taking care of their kids, the numbers actually rise to those just below white couples. I think there was an article on that. I don't know if I remember, saw it in Vice, but it tracks back to some really big study that was done back in 2016. So that's one point. But you are right. There are perverse incentives. For example, many welfare stipulations cut off with a shared income, which is only a few $1,000s per year higher than the necessary cutoff for the single income. Meaning that if you're a single mom, you can apply for the welfare just fine. But then if you get married or otherwise file jointly, you go above the cap for welfare. This is a horribly designed program, undeniably, and it incentivizes bad, destructive behavior. The best thing that we can do, we restructure the welfare system in this country. Welfare is good for us. It is. I don't benefit from it. No, I don't think either of you benefit from it, I'm guessing. But we do collectively downstream from the increased economic potential of people who now have the money to afford daycare, proper childcare, get an education. In the long run, people in this country being richer enriches all of us. It's a mutual project. So we work on that. We find out what works and what doesn't, which welfare programs function, which don't, which types of economic revitalization function and which don't. And I legitimately believe that if we applied this country has the bones to be just a permanent economic beacon on the hill, just like a shining example to the rest of the world.
I agree with a lot of that. The bigger issue with the racial thing is that when you put some of these factors in even to present data, it doesn't pan out on racial lines, right? And this is where I think you'll agree, because you just said 2 parents in the home is a good thing, which we totally agree on. I think that's the ideal. Everything shows that is something that we should, push for.
3 parents, maybe. Getting even better.
Oh, yeah.
50%.
Yeah,
Hope
polyamorous
it works that way.
relationships.
Yeah.
Not a fan.
Based.
But I will say that if you look at the data from the government, that a white child being raised by a single mother is less likely to succeed by 10 independently picked metrics than a black child being raised by a mother and a father. And so maybe it's less about the skin color and more about the removal of parents and specifically fathers in the homes. Now, if you want to talk about a domestic Marshall Plan to go put fathers back in the home regardless of skin color, I will sign up for that in a second.
With the right welfare, the right systems, I think people will tend to their own families.
But that would then all of a sudden de-emphasize what you said earlier, where it says it needs to be on racial lines, where I say, no, it needs to be on nuclear family lines.
Well, no, I think that the neighborhood revitalization should just be on like a sort of class assessment. I think that when we recognize this problem, though, there are so many trends when it comes to poverty that involve the discussion of race, and there are some which do not. There are some types of poverty, some effects that are just ubiquitous and equally felt. But with regards to, say, black people, the fact that they couldn't get loans to purchase homes for a very long time. I mean, there were people living who couldn't do this. The fact that they didn't benefit from the Marshall Plan, if I remember correctly, after World War II.
Well, Marshall Plan was Europe. You're talking about the GI Bill. I
Oh,
think.
sorry, the GI Bill. My apologies.
Let me just point out all these white guys sitting here having a debate over the black community, huh?
I just
I'm
think
kidding.
that there is a lot of economic inequality. A lot of it's tied to race, but we don't need to turn this into some weird blood quantum issue where we go tracking down every black American and holding them under a microscope to see whether they get benefits.
Now-
we just need to tend to our own.
This is where I want to. We kind of got off critical race
realized I
theory very
lost
quickly.
half my
I forgot
I
about
wanna-
that.
I want to bring
Yeah.
it back.
We're
because-
agreeing way too much, Tim.
All right.
No, because this is one of the issues I see. Right, you see these conversations around. I don't know how you describe it because it's a variety of things. Wokeism is typically a catch-all term for some kind of ideology that involves anti-racism, which involves critical race theory, critical race praxis. And you're seeing in schools specific curriculums where they say to kids like, we had a book here We had a book brought to us by one of these parents who's been going to these schools, and it was an anti-racist curriculum workbook where it asked it asked children why they thought that black children felt bad about their skin color. Now, I take issue with those things. They had another book where it was a little girl yelling at her mother saying, "You were lying to me about race." And then there was a whiteness contract with a devil tail coming out of it.
Okay, I saw that one.
Yeah, these are in schools.
Yeah, okay, so that the whiteness devil tail thing, I saw that. That's indefensible.
Yeah.
I'm not going to stand at that. With regards to that, what was it? Why do you think black folk feel bad about their skin?
And I'll be careful because I don't have the book in front of me. It was something to this effect. It was a bunch of questions where it would ask you things like that and then ask you to answer. You know, what have you done to make someone, based on their skin color, behave or whatever, and things of that nature.
I think these are conversations that are worth having. I wonder, with regards to what you're saying, do you know what grade level these were at?
I think she mentioned the woman. It was Asra.
Yeah, Azra.
I think 4th grade.
Yeah, that's what I heard.
But I got to be honest, like the anti-racist one didn't have any pictures or anything. It was just questions, and I think she mentioned it was in a 3rd grade. The what was it called? What was the book called about the whiteness contract? The one you said was indefensible. That one was like a little girl who looked to be about like 8 years old. So
Yeah, I saw that online.
Can I ask a question? So let's go to just piece,
Yeah, sure. Go
issue
for
by
it.
issue. Ibram X. Kendi, who's kind of one of the, archangels of the wokeism movement.
Beloved figure in the minds of conservatives and liberals alike.
So Ibram X. Kendi, and I'm paraphrasing, and you guys could pick up the quote, is that we need discrimination today because there was discrimination yesterday. That's the essence of the quote, right, Tim?
yeah, he said the only solution for past discrimination is present discrimination, and the only solution for present discrimination is future discrimination.
So I find that to be reprehensible. What say you?
I think it's misguided in large part because I don't believe if there was some god who could just distribute all resources in a perfectly ordained way and did so at the snap of a finger, then maybe that would be a decent argument. In the real world, we have to go through politics, and any kind of discriminatory treatment under any circumstances, no matter how well intentioned, is going to have adverse effects. So with regard to what he said, there is a very charitable interpretation, and that charitable interpretation is discriminatory practices in the past necessitate favorable practices today, a way of bringing people up. My reparations argument, I mean, the poor in this country have always had it bad, at least worse than they could otherwise. That is essentially a version of that argument. Preferable treatment towards the poor. We do this with welfare because there are systemic barriers keeping them from full participation. Along racial lines, I don't even know what that would look like. I don't even know how that would look good. I'm not a big fan of affirmative
He wrote an
action.
amendment, right, called the Anti-Racist Amendment to the Constitution. It's not being considered anytime soon, where it would be preference.
So you'll see, Biden will get it.
Yeah, based on skin color, that there would be some sort of accommodation based just by the melanin content in your skin.
There is one thing I want to say, though, and this is common in upper academia, and I know Ibram sometimes gets brought into non-academic discussions, which I don't consider myself an academic, so I'm including myself in that. But sometimes I think these are fun to discuss, these ideas. What I noticed, at least in some of the classes that I took, the higher-end classes, was that sometimes when you were presented ideas, they were presented not to have you agree with them, but rather to incentivize the greatest discussion. For example, I wasn't an economist, but I did learn about Karl Marx. Now, not many professors are actual Marxists, unfortunately. So when Marx was brought up in that context, it wasn't like, here's what you need to know, here's what you should believe. It was more, here are some ideas, radical and agreeable. What do you think about them? And when I look at what Kendi has written, I don't often agree with some of the more radical propositions, but I do enjoy the process. And I don't think that's something which should warrant the state intervening to cut out those discussions. I think that's a
great
brutish response.
That's a great segue, if I could go. So the next question then is, should we be teaching first and second and third graders to be hyper-conscious aware of race all the time? I think that's destructive. I think it goes against the American promise of e pluribus unum, of caring more about character than skin color. And yes, Martin Luther King Jr. was a mixed bag when it came to this stuff.
He's a cool guy.
But he was a very
Martin Luther
radical
King-
socialist in some regard. But
Hi, 3M
he really hit it
1LY0.
perfectly.
I'm
when
listening
he said
to
that this was the
a
ideal
rebroadcast of the Charlie
the
Kirk
American
Vosh
system.
debate.
Do you-
Martin
do you
Luther
see
King
any
Jr.
downsides
was
to getting
an
3-year-olds just
avowed
caring- not 3-year-olds, third graders
Marxist.
caring about the color of
Not
people's
like
skin all the time.
that he was
Well, I think depending
sworn
on their
to
environment,
Marxism,
they might already
all of
whether
the
they
things
know
he
it or not,
swore
very
by,
implicit in subtle ways. We
he
know
came
from
to
tests done,
on
for
his
example,
own,
on, like,
and they are
little
exactly the
kids,
same
like 4-year-olds or
conclusions that
whatever,
Marx came
that some
to.
elements of implicit
Marx
racial bias
convinced
already
Abraham
affect their
Lincoln
thinking.
to
Now, that
abolish
isn't a moral
slavery,
judgment.
for example.
We're all flawed beings. We live and
Like,
we die. we all have biases. That is just a part of life. But I think conversations
Seriously,
about
like,
those things can be valuable.
Marxism
I
is
don't
responsible for a
believe we live
lot
in
of the
colorblind
good in
world,
the world.
So teaching people that we do can often lead them to
Misinterpretations
remain
of Marx
ignorant to
are what led
evident
to
problems. Now, to
the
what extent
type
would you be
of communism
comfortable?
that people fear
What would
monger
you like bringing a racial consciousness to third graders?
For me, very little to none. As don't care about it, de-emphasize it, look at the spirit, the soul, the conduct, and the character of the human being. Their skin color means nothing. Not saying that you should start to emphasize, organize what people look like, because therefore it means something that we're going to tell you. A great example is that this is the textbook definition of stereotyping, right? Is that if you see a black person, you don't know their history. You don't know if they're the son of a Nigerian billionaire. You don't know if they're an immigrant from Turks and Caicos. And you don't know if they're the 9th generation descendant of slaves, right? There's been 2 million blacks that have come to America legally through the immigration process since 1980. So this sort of hyper fixation on race, and I want to keep on getting back to this because I'm just curious.
He's just
is,
flat out
do you think
lying
this is
at this
actually
point.
helpful
Again,
when
Charlie Kirk.
when there actually might be
Seriously?
stuff that 90% of the country agrees on? Do you think this actually might be a smokescreen tactic?
Well, it really depends on what's being taught. So here are some things I obviously don't want taught. One group is better than another, of course, you know. Black people are like this, white people are like this.
That is
This
being
isn't-
taught in some schools.
There
just
are
so we're
some
clear.
schools that do that, and while I would look to see their curriculum mended, I don't. Again, I just don't want to implicitly agree with like a state ban. I would see adjustments done. But there are some things that I think could be done well. For example, say you're teaching about very basic early history, you know?
This is where I wanted to get to.
Yeah,
This
okay.
is important.
So here are some things about America's founding that I like. One of the first practical liberal democracies, glory of the republic. Folks had nice hair back then. I
Not a
don't know.
democracy, but a republic.
Right.
That's
Well,
okay.
I mean, you know, they're not mutually exclusive, and we, of course, did more to fulfill the promise of a democracy with time. But obviously, when America was founded, it was a slave state. 1 in every 6 people in America at that time was human property.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
How many states had abolished slavery by the time the Constitution was ratified?
Well, I don't know the exact number.
9 out
but
of
I imagine-
13. That's not a slave country.
Well, then you could say it was a confederacy with portions that were slave
I think
states.
that's better said. 9 out of 13 had already abolished. There was a sunset moratorium for slavery in the Constitution.
So this could.
Vermont abolished slavery in 1777. We were on the way to eradication. We were not a slave country.
Well, hold on. I mean,
And I'll add
we,
one thing real-
we were on the way, but then like 80 years later, it was still happening.
So the question is why, right? That's a really important question. And the
Economics, I
well,
imagine.
yeah. So Cotton Gin and
Well-
John C. Calhoun.
well,
Happy
hold
to
on.
go through that. But yeah,
There was actually a grievance in the Declaration of Independence, specifically that the Crown had enslaved
the
people.
first draft.
Yeah, in the first draft from Thomas Jefferson, the Crown had enslaved people who had done nothing to offend the Crown, brought them to the states, and then were then offering them the freedom that was stolen from them to wage war against the colonists who had grievances.
It's an
Now,
effective strategy. The
It is,
Union did it
but
too.
he-
They promised the slaves
Right.
when they moved southward. Yeah.
Jefferson took that out, and he did it because they felt, and this is according to historians, that without, I think it was South Carolina and Georgia, they would not have been able to win the Revolutionary War, and so they had to remove that,
That's exactly
hoping
right.
they would stay in. Now, the reality is, I'll just say one more point. They thought they were going to lose anyway. They really did. They didn't think they could go up against the greatest empire in the world at the time. So it's kind of unfortunate, I think. An important factor here is that I believe it was the British Empire actually 1833 had abolished slavery in all of its territories, and it took the U.S. a little bit longer to do so. But I want to make sure I stress this issue from the start of the country was contentious and ultimately led to violence because from the beginning, as Charlie pointed out, most of the states had already abolished this, so it was like people were ready to fight from the beginning.
Oh, I just want to say to that, my understanding of the founding of America isn't as simplistic as the founding fathers were evil because X or Y. I recognize, of course, that
And I appreciate that.
there are incredible complexities to those issues. And also, I'm not a historian. There are probably tons of things out there I don't even know that might change my opinion in the future. But with that being said, while I recognize there were fine-bodied, hearted, and souled Americans who recognized slavery was a moral aberration from the get-go, 1 in every 6 Americans was owned. And while that may have been constrained to some of the states, it was still ultimately under the purview of the federal government to make decisions with regards to the legality and constitutionality of that. Now, some people, they get really defensive when this conversation comes. I'm not saying you guys, but some people, they do. And I think it's because they think I'm assigning some kind of moral worth to them now or to the country now or making some kind of broad prescriptive statement. I'm not. The only thing I'm saying is, when you're teaching history to a bunch of kids, you know, you have to teach it all. At least you have to teach the basic pointers. And for black Americans, the history of this country has been less than favorable. So I think that in the context of that discussion, saying, and to this day, we still have some problems with race. There are some legacies of slavery that still affect black people, and we're working on it today. Something like that. That's a kind of racialization that I'm in favor of, because it doesn't encourage stereotyping, it doesn't encourage discrimination, it just encourages a base awareness of some serious problems.
So, but that's not happening, right? Is that largely what we're seeing through school districts like Chicago and in Washington, D.C., and the entire California school system, representing 10,000 schools and 6 million students.
I've seen the documents on those.
Yeah, is that it doesn't have that kind of nuance and complexity that you just presented, right? Where let me just say this,
yeah,
is that part of the kind of archangel triumphant of the wokeism coalition is Nicole Hannah-Jones, Robin DiAngelo, and Ibram X. Kendi. And Nicole Hannah-Jones in particular, right, the author of the 1619 Project, she heretically says that America was founded on slavery, right? And so
I'd
part
be
of
okay with that.
but it's just not true.
It depends on what you mean by founded on.
Yeah, it
She defends
depends.
She
It
says
depends
the
on
founding
what she means.
fathers were in favor of it. Not true. George Washington wasn't. John Adams wasn't. John Quincy Adams wasn't. Thomas Jefferson even signed a moratorium on new slaves coming
But
into the
most
United
of the
States.
signers
Ben
of the
Franklin chaired
Constitution
an
were.
anti-slavery convention in 1775.
Most.
None of these guys were writing expositionally how wonderful slavery
Well,
was.
this isn't being taught to third graders, right? The 1619 Project's a little New York op-ed. It's
No, it's
part of
not.
the-
See, that's where you're wrong. The 1619 project's being implemented as school district curriculum in thousands of school districts across the country.
I've
That's
seen-
true.
well,
Across the
It's
country.
not just like a podcast. This is curriculum.
Right, there are principles of the 1619 Project that I think are defensible. First of all, we as Americans tend to think of the founding of our country as its legal founding, you know? But the legal founding of the United States didn't really mean much for a slave. I mean, it really didn't matter that much for the peasantry of the time, no matter what.
See, that's where I disagree. So when was the first state to abolish slavery? Vermont in 1777. Why?
Well, I mean, for the
because they were
slaves who lived
inspired
in-
by the Declaration of Independence. Things started to change in that year,
Right, but the slaves that then continued to be slaves would have been in the states that didn't make that choice, right?
which
I mean,
were
they would have been
largely
the-
in southern states.
So,
And-
yeah. Well, that's what I mean. I didn't mean to miss out on the particulars there. The only point that I'm making is that depending on
So,
whose lineage you follow,
trying to figure
depending
out
on the
something
narrative
here.
that you tell, this is a very postmodern idea. And I would like to consider myself charitable to postmodernism, the idea that there are many ways you can describe the human experience, which I think we all believe to some extent. Depending on who you follow, you get very different ideas on what America is, when America was founded, not in a legal sense, but in a conceptual sense, and who today holds the birthrights to which they were entitled. And these conversations should be had. They're worthwhile conversations to have. I've seen some of the curriculums in these schools. I find some of them a little bit objectionable. But to be perfectly clear, I've found school curriculums objectionable for ages. About half of Americans believe in the lost cause myth, the idea that the North started the a civil war and it was over like states' rights or whatever. That's believed by a large number of Americans. There are textbooks put out by Pearson in Texas that have
there is
narratives
some
in them
truth
that
to
are-
that, by the way.
There's,
Just so we're clear.
It is
I'm
a
happy to go through Civil War history.
Well, let me-
on
let me-
that, but yeah.
I just want to say, I have long had problems with many of the ways children are taught concepts in this country.
That's fair.
None of them have made me want to get my state legislators to just outright ban all of these ideas.
Well, so let me. I'll make 2 points. First, the 1619 Project is in schools. Newsweek reports U.S. schools have openly taught the 1619 Project for months. This is back in September. We've got Education Next. The 1619 Project enters classrooms. We have the Pulitzer Center, the 1619 Project curriculum. Here you will find resources for teaching 1619 in your schools. And I don't know if I have one more source. Right. Then we move to
Do they
Raven
read the full
coins
thing in
are
class?
next.
That's crazy. It's pretty dense
Gold,
reading.
Raven,
you know?
and
They
It
do
is.
They do it.
And then lawmakers push to ban 1619 from schools. So it's there. It is.
And so let me tell you why people like myself are pushing for the bans of the 1619 Project. Is that first of all, it's just not true. It is not.
It actually
even
is. The 1619
charitably-
Project is
in the most
actually-
charitable reading, to use a word that you used, even remotely fair to the ethos or the founding of the country. It doesn't go to original.
It doesn't
text
have to.
documents.
Doesn't matter the
It doesn't
ethos.
go
It
to
matters the
quotations,
results.
and it meanders through generalizations.
You're not being
and
conservative
very
here,
heavy
Charlie Kirk.
emphasis on
You're being
Can I
liberal.
ask something though, really
Sure,
quick?
go
Good
ahead.
gods.
Is this not being presented as an alternate perspective as opposed to replacing the entirety of our curriculum?
No, it is, and this is an important thing, which is what is education? right? So is education where we're supposed to, for 3rd, 4th, and 5th, and 6th graders, open up every single bad idea that's ever been discovered and have kids choose? Or are we trying to lead them towards something? Lead them towards having better developed character? Lead them towards trying to find objective truth?
Moral. We want to make them moral.
I agree. And so the question is, what is good? What is evil? Well, we don't know a line is crooked unless we have a straight line to compare it to.
Well, you know what I think on this, don't you?
I actually don't.
The narrative we've told about the founding of this country has for a long time been deeply whitewashed. We talk about the founding fathers like they're heroes, and there is heroism in their lives, no denying that. And we often gloss over many of the horrors of this country. There are things that we've done, for example, that we would use as an incentive to forever despise other countries that nobody's even taught about. Like one I read recently, for example, was that we did mass chemical bathings, and I believe it was sterilizations of Hispanic people at the beginning of the 20th century, moving up past the southern border, because there were like these militias forming in towns near the border, and they just did it because they had the de facto support of the local government as a way of discouraging their movement up. Now, the numbers involved in that are significant, and I feel like, well, that's maybe not great for 4th graders, there could be more work done to talk about the faults with this country in addition to eulogizing its
the question is,
largely
what's
white
the
leaders.
goal, though, right? Is the goal to try to have young people graduate by the time of high school to be skeptical, apprehensive, and not very proud of the country? Or eventually tell a true and patriotic story where you have people graduating that are thankful and have gratitude?
Oh,
That's the purpose of education when it comes through.
Gratitude is not the purpose of education.
It is not.
I think gratitude's a moral necessity.
No, you should
No.
be grateful for the people in your life, but I will never be grateful to the state. I'm not that much of a
Well,
collectivist.
not a state. Are you not thankful that you live in America?
I'm thankful of the things that make my life easier. I was born white to well-off parents, and today I enjoy many of the benefits of having really responsible and attentive
Are you
parents.
thankful you have constitutional rights that are protected by government, given
True.
to you by God?
But do you know how those constitutional rights came about? They were fought
They
for by
were-
whiny bitches like me who were never satisfied with what they were already
They
given.
were granted by God, protected in the
No!
They
Constitution
were
in
fought for by
1787.
whiny, same as the 14th and 15th Amendments, everything that's come since, we fought for them, and it is discontentedness
Are you
that
thankful
leads
for
us
those
to fight.
people then?
I'm thankful
Discontentedness
for their
leads
efforts.
everyone
As am
to
I for
fight.
There's some gratitude.
Sure, I'm grateful to them, but patriotism, I'm grateful to what people in America do. But America's a concept. It's been used to do a lot of good and a lot of harm.
It's a home.
Well, a home can be I mean, in the broadest sense, but I know what my home is. I know where my family lives, and I'm loyal to them. When it comes to this country, though, this is a political and economic bloc, and I have only one concern, and it's that the people in this country live the best lives possible. Also outside the country, but I live here. This is my backyard. And when I want people graduating, from high school, I don't want them to feel this sense of contentedness. Contentedness is the death of activism for all that's good. And activists have always been, you're an activist in your own way, as am I, have always been the forerunners for good.
They've done a lot of damage too.
Sure, they have, but we make the world move. And I want to get kids interested in the flaws in this country because that teaches them to grow up and care about them so hard they fix them.
This is a great piece of disagreement. We have clarity, not agreement, which is obviously what we want, where I think that we should try to be developing and graduating kids with strong character that want to appreciate and protect a country and to try to be active against forces that wish to deconstruct it. Your goal, and we're just not going to persuade each other, is that you want to try to graduate activists that know the flaws and are willing to mobilize to try to fix them or to undo whatever system might be effectuating. Is that fair?
As long as it's responsible and effective, yeah. There are ways to do progressive. Of course, I'm a progressive, so I'll say it's good by default, but there are ways to do it poorly. I disagree with people on the left constantly, either over issues of actual concept or issues of optics or issues of engagement. I always find something to disagree with people on. It's very fun living. But with all that being said, I have to wonder, is it not the prerogative, and I'm not assigning this to you, of tyrants to make sure that the children who graduate from their schools find no fault in the nations they're taught to love?
See, I never said no fault, but you could be thankful for something, and you can have a holistic view of something and understand that there were stumbles and there were missteps, while also being pretty freaking proud of that something. How exceptional this project
What
is.
if there are current problems, like today,
We should talk about those. Like we already talked about fatherlessness, government overreach. Tim, you want to interject?
Oh, no, I think It's interesting to me. You're from the suburbs of Chicago.
Yes.
You grew up in Beverly Hills.
Mhm.
Somebody commented, I think it was on Twitter. They said that when they went to school, they weren't taught about Black Wall Street or the Tulsa bombings and things like that. And that's proof, or that shows that our schools are not teaching. And I was like, I was taught all those things.
So
in
was
Chicago. We were taught about the Trail of Tears. We were taught about westward expansion. We were taught about the violation of treaties.
I was taught a lot as well.
Yeah, we were taught a lot about that.
When we learn history, what we're really learning is a story. I think it's called historiography. Obviously, when we're just looking at the facts of history, I mean, what is it, data and sheets, wrote transcriptions of things people have said. Nobody teaches that. You teach the story. And the story we've told for a long time has bowled over a lot of problems I think we should work to fix. Do we want people to be thankful? Sure. I don't want to...
So we agree on that. Good.
I don't want to stop teaching kids that there are undeniable things they should be happy for. For example, every day that I worked before I was a YouTuber, I thanked union activists back during the turn of the 20th century who gave us the 5-day work week, the 40-hour work week, who ensured that we had proper standards for lunch breaks and what have you in this. And they fought and they were whiny, and I'm sure a lot of them had really bad ideas besides the worker activism. But we all benefited from that.
Do you ever think that as
think
an
I
activist,
overused on
as
my
a
resin.
progressive, a libertarian socialist, is there ever a point where the activism actually does much more harm than good, and the preservation of what already exists actually should be desirable?
I would say that's the case with black separatists. There are some people in this country, not all of them are black, of course, but who believe that the racial problems between white and black Americans are irreparable, and that the best solution would be for black Americans to leave, or at the very least to form separate enclaves within this
And that's
country.
nothing new, just so you know.
I don't think
Oh,
that's
no,
what
it's very old.
I don't think that's what Charlie asked. He asked you if there. Do you want to rephrase?
Yeah,
Like-
so...
Oh,
so-
sorry if I misunderstood.
Well, you were in the general area, but I guess the question is a heavy emphasis on activism for activism's sake, mobilizing for grievances. What if actually what we have as a constitutional order is actually pretty awesome?
Let me ask. Do you think there are things worth that are
Constitution
systems in place
itself
in the
is
United
still
States that are
pretty
worth
bad.
defending?
That's a better way to word it.
Yes. Do you believe that there are systems in place in the United States that we should defend and preserve?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there are ideas. For example, the concept of democracy, the concept of fair representation, the idea that anybody could have a chance if they make it here. These are ideas that I think are almost sacrosanct. I mean, I think they're almost existentially worthwhile. Now, to what extent does this country live up to those promises? In some ways, it does so better than most other countries, sometimes any other country. In other ways, it could do better. Income mobility here, which is the measure for how effectively this country manages its meritocratic systems, is higher in some European countries than it is here. The idea remains valuable to me, but I can't help but think maybe we could make it better. If making it better entails some highly destructive process that involves tearing down everything we've ever known and such, then, I mean, eventually you have to do a risk-reward benefit, right?
So what I'm trying to caution you about is that the people pushing CRT or wokeism, they don't have the same sort of nuance that you do. These are revolutionaries that want to tear down the system.
But I am as well. I just think that everything has its time.
You just had kind of a little bit more of a moderated answer.
But how often do actual critical race theorists come on all of the talk show circuits that end up? I mean, we've had some. I mean, Joy Reid advocated for it, but the actual
Hold on.
scholars.
They're running Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman. They're running the United States military.
No,
They're running-
now you're going
they're
conspiratorial.
they're
Shirley,
assigning
Kurt,
these
come
ideas.
on.
Again,
No,
wokeism. Let's use that.
With Robin DiAngelo and the federal
White
training-
fragility.
Right. I'm not a big fan of her largely because I think her language incites a lot of negative discourse. I think that it's bad for publication. Maybe good in an
So
academic
not
setting.
good to teach generals that.
For some random people at a business? Absolutely not. No.
No,
The big-
generals in the military.
Oh, yeah, sure, no.
Because that's what's happening.
Well, the big problem that I have, but keep in mind, that's not wokeists running these things. What happens is this, and put pretty simply, the majority of Americans broadly are progressive on these issues. Support BLM, all these sort of broad cultural markers. So corporations and other large entities think we need to avoid a cancellation, we need to appeal to the business interests of this country, we need to do something to ingratiate ourselves to the majority opinion. So oftentimes, and they've done this for decades, by the way, is they find some consultants, they pay them $300,000.
Like Robin DiAngelo.
Like Robin DiAngelo, to come on over there, and Robin DiAngelo's job, first and foremost, is to convince everyone who hires her that she was worth that money. So is she going to come over there and write a PowerPoint don't be racist. Like, come on, be cool. No, she has to go all out. And what you get are these cringy, like the Coca-Cola PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Where you get, look, some of the things there are defensible. Does systemic racism exist? Sure. Should we be aware of the concept of, like, implicit bias? Yeah, fine. That's good. That's just normal human things, I think. But some of the language in there really made it seem like she wanted white people to feel a little bit bad. And I don't want white people to feel bad. I don't want anyone to feel guilty over who they are.
What percentage of this country do you think supports Black Lives Matter?
Well, I know that at its peak after George Floyd's murder, it was something like 71%. I think since then it's trended downwards. Is it gone below 50?
Yes. And,
wow.
well, it depends on where you go. I use Civics. They have 237,458 responses from April 1st, 2018 to August 2nd, 2021. I think they do a pretty good job, but there's always, I know, a challenge with polls and whether they, their system. The peak support was 53% after the death of George Floyd, and opposition actually declined fairly steadily. There was no major spike in opposition. There was a major spike in support after the death of George Floyd. However, there was a rapid escalation of opposition. According to Civics, current support for Black Lives Matter is 45% and opposition is 42%.
Those numbers are really different from us. I might have looked at Pew Research. I couldn't tell about the methodology, which is more valid.
Well, and
of
it's
course.
actually, CRT, the filler word, is very unpopular. So I would look at it differently. I think these corporations have been infiltrated by highly motivated activists, which you said the education system, the goal should be to create activists that have really bad ideas. And I think they're putting America on a trajectory that I think you are even concerned about. Because you said that there are some sacrosanct ideas, right? The sacrosanct ideas are general fair representation. Wokeism does not believe in that.
Well, no, that's not true. I would say, I don't know what you mean by wokeism, but I think that there are plenty of progressives.
Defined it, which is that the idea of judging people based on skin color, discrimination.
I would say that what I've advocated for represents the supermajority of progressive opinions, and what we're largely seeing is a couple of really bad examples being brought to the limelight because they're most objectionable.
Sure. To be fair, though, you might have these very, very well thought out views of things. You could say, "Oh, that's indefensible." Of course, I don't want to be unreasonable. But when you get Mark Milley coming out and talking about white rage as a blanket,
I thought his speech was lovely. It reminded me of those
lovely.
old Chinese philosopher generals.
But you have people quitting the military over this stuff because they feel like they're. I've actually spoken with people who retired because they've been discriminated against on racial lines they don't like. And one guy I met said he was planning a lifelong career in the military and immediately got out because they implemented these policies of white racial trainings. They were told that the symbols of America are no longer allowed to be displayed in private because they're extremists.
In the military?
In the military,
okay,
yes.
Well, I can't speak to any of that. I haven't looked into the particulars of that. The only thing I want to say is that it feels like with Robin DiAngelo, we've seen this pattern for decades now. I don't think it has anything to do with infiltration. I think it's the big ups, the CEOs, the project managers, whatever. They know there's some broader political, social, cultural trend happening, and they think, who's someone we could get? And if you look up racial sensitivity training on Google or anywhere else, some names are going to pop up, and we know which one comes up first, and they just hire that person because they've got money and they need to spend it before the end of the quarter so their budget doesn't get cut.
Do you think that it should be... How's the right way to phrase this? If a corporation were to tell, say, white employees that they had inherent characteristics based on their race, or that they should undergo some kind of course or class based on their race, should businesses be allowed to do that?
You mean legally or morally?
Both.
I suppose legally if they want to. I can understand people being upset over it. I don't think there's anything wrong with racial sensitivity training in concept. The problem is that it's almost always done by this consultant class of upper middle class WASPs who are really, really intent on getting their own milquetoast veil of progressivism pushed down the throats of whoever they can have paid to listen to them. If it's a good course, everyone should be able to hear it.
Wouldn't that violate the Civil Rights Act, though?
It might. I guess that I would defer entirely to law. If it turns out to be unconstitutional, then he had it. I just want to say, though, that while we are fixating on bad behaviors here, and there's nothing wrong with that, I do maintain my insistence that I think the vast majority of progressives would agree with what I have to say. Though, keep in mind, there are always going to be a mix of good and bad ideas with good social movements. Even the Civil Rights Act, or the Civil Rights Movement, which we all know and love today, can't deny it. There were plenty of people acting there whose ideas I disagreed with. Malcolm X, when he had his black separatist phase, though he amended that before he died. There are even ideas of Martin Luther King's that I maybe could question if I spoke with him. He wrote a book after the Civil Rights Act. Where do we go from here? Chaos or something? Chaos or something good? And he said a lot of stuff about the responsibility for white people to not make amends, but to educate themselves on the experience of black suffering so that we no longer just integrate. We truly assimilate. We know we're a collective bond. There's always going to be some disagreement. Is the movement valid? To me, a movement which recognizes the racial discrimination, the systemic racism that exists, that there are problems we have yet to overcome, this is a movement worth defending.
I just want to make some data points real quick, and then Charlie, you can come in. Man. So first, the one thing I wanted to highlight, let me actually pull this up, is that net support, which is support versus opposition, before George Floyd died for Black Lives Matter in this country was 16% net support. As of today, according to Civics, it's 3%. That brings it all the way back to 2018, to August 16th. Now, one of the things I think is really important to note is the severe tribalism and hyperpolarization in this country. So if we look at support for Black Lives Matter among Democrats, 86%. Support or opposition for Black Lives Matter among Republicans, 86%. Opposition, mirror image. You take a look at independents.
We're more alike than we may think, huh?
Right. You take a look at the independents, though, people who don't align, and I would say, what is the date around May 1st, there was an inversion, and now the majority of independents oppose Black Lives Matter, 44% to 39%.
That's not surprising to me, given that there's been very little in the way of optical. I'm sorry, you haven't spoken in a while. I apologize.
No,
I just wanted to make those data points just to clarify some things.
I wanted this to be more of a discussion than a debate, so I think it's actually really helpful. Are you concerned when certain judges or people running for DA say that accommodations on sentencing should be made on race? Does that bother you?
Who said that? I've never heard that before.
Well, people in law schools have been saying it.
Well, I mean, students have always
Kim
been.
Fox in Chicago has heavily implied that communities of color need to be accommodated for in sentencing. And they've all but done this by just getting rid of the bail laws that we've seen altogether,
Well,
right?
I mean-
Decriminalizing shoplifting, all that, please.
Oh, I'm totally okay with that. We
Okay.
lock way too many people up, just flat out. That's not even.
So like murder out the next day.
No, not murder. You
Well,
said
that's-
shoplifting.
Well, I'm just saying, just the bail reform laws in New Mexico and California have been a disaster. Go
Well, I
ahead.
can't speak to that. Oh, sorry.
Here's actually a really great point. It's a tough one for me. I agree. I think we lock way too many people up. I err on the side of liberty, innocent until proven guilty. To take a working class individual who is accused of shoplifting before he's even been proven of guilt, lock him up for several months, he loses his job. However, what do we see in San Francisco? Mm-hmm. Wave of shoplifting, businesses shutting down because when you don't stop the crime, you get, I guess, a lot of crime.
Yeah,
it's a tough issue. I wanted to let you guys.
I think we'll totally disagree on this. You first.
Maybe. Well, I've read a lot on recidivism. We have a fairly high recidivism rate in this country because really the thing that causes crime more than anything else, it's not actually poverty, it's income inequality. When poor people and rich people share the same space, it leads to a lot of problems. All poor people together in a neighborhood, what is there to steal? Poor people and rich people together in a neighborhood. There you go. You have very clean targets. And what's more, there are other forms of criminality that only really fully express themselves in the types of neighborhoods that have a really strong mix of wealthy and poor. I could see that because, again, from where I grew up, I lived on the border of a lot of low-income communities. Now, Beverly Hills, safest place you could be. 3 a.m., you want to take a jog, go for it. Seriously.
Not anymore.
Maybe. Oh, I haven't been there in like
You'd
5
be
years.
surprised, man.
I'll say this.
Good luck walking Rodeo Drive now.
Well, okay, first on, I don't want to walk Rodeo Drive during the daylight, okay?
Well, I agree.
agree.
But after Garcon has had his work in L.A., it's a disaster.
Violent crime is down since the 90s. We've had a bit of an up since
It's
COVID.
up
But
massive in the last year.
oh, well, COVID's led to a lot of really weird exigent factors.
Well,
But
defunding the police.
with all, we haven't defunded the police anywhere.
Minneapolis.
Maybe okay, in a couple
a
places.
lot of places.
Hold on a second.
There-
That's not true. Minneapolis, Portland, Seattle, they've all cut police budgets.
200,
I should be- well-
260 departments, I think it was reported last year, had stripped their funding
Yeah.
from
Sorry,
departments.
when you said defund, I thought I meant like the anarchist vision of like community policing. When it comes to police funds being stripped, there is a conversation to be had about the relationship between that and crime. But the crime increase seems to be all countrywide, so I don't know if I'd be leaning more towards that being a COVID thing and people being restless and angry and I don't know, aggressive. The thing that I'm trying to say though is when I grew up in Beverly Hills, really, really safe, free from violent crime. I could walk half a mile, though, and the area between rich and poor were the areas where people had barred windows. every time. So when it comes to criminality, there are things that we can address very fundamentally that will help everyone. I'm sure there are restructures to bail laws that we could do. I don't know the particulars. It's not my field. I've also read stuff on recidivism. Apparently, murder actually has a very low default recidivist rate because usually it's done under a very specific set of heated conditions that don't actually speak to a person's character, which makes you wonder a lot about like moral worth and what really drives a person to do that sort of thing. I think it's something we should look at critically, though I don't have any really strong data-based arguments. The last thing I want to say, because it's the first point that you brought up, is racial responses to the criminal justice system. Yeah, I didn't forget. I'm actually going to triple down on this one, okay? Not only do I think that we should aggressively look at the ways our sentencing laws affect and discriminate between black and white people and Hispanic Nation, I think we should do the same between men and women. Because as much as black people are shafted by the criminal justice system, men are even more. If you take a look at the disproportionate rates of sentencing, relative levels of implicit bias in the jury, women get off with way more than men
Posh
do.
MRA confirmed.
Way more. So, I mean, maybe it's something we can all agree on. We're guys, I think.
Well, so the issue, though, is that when you remove race, it's just a matter of income or wealth. For example, if LeBron James goes in front of a jury, he's going to have the best lawyers. Mm-hmm. And obviously that's an extreme example, right? But O.J. Simpson had an all-star team. And so the problem is that
Obama. He would also have good lawyers.
O.J. Simpson? Oh, yeah.
Obama.
No, sorry. I was going to say, you didn't have Obama as a lawyer.
No,
You had
Well, let me say,
Kardashian and
Let's see the
Dershowitz.
moon.
Sorry.
I would just like to interject that Obama
Characters almost
extrajudicially
unjustly charged.
assassinated
The
people,
defense.
and nobody did anything
True.
about it. So
Now
Your
that's
own
black
seconds.
privilege.
But
That's a joke. Don't.
So-
Five stock has
Don't.
independent
But I
duration.
think that there's an implication in your argument that I want to challenge, which is that just because you're poor doesn't mean you commit crimes. I think that's an insult to poor people, right? And so I think that if you automatically assume that, now there are data trends to suggest that, but instead it should be the question of what are we trying to structurally do or through incentives to either punish the people that are committing crimes and lift people out of that current level. So I think it's a good talking point, but I don't think it's totally true to say we have too many people in prison. I think we have the wrong people in prison. Let me tell you why.
We have more than like any other
talk
country.
about
No,
some of
let me
these.
tell you why.
Yeah.
The average rapist serves 4 years in prison, and they're very likely to rape again. Totally different than
Hey,
murder.
look, if you want funding that goes to police departments to go towards actually looking at the rape kits that they take rather
well
than stuffing
over
them into a bin.
250,000 untested rape kits in the tri-state area in New York City. 250,000, right? So our criminal justice system, you could say it had nefarious intentions. I'll be neutral on that. Was very heavy on drugs, obviously in the 80s and 90s. But generally, though, you cited the number.
Cairo.
You said violent crime's been down since the 90s. Why do you think that is? It's because we were tough on crime in the 80s, and we had a massive campaign against it, and we had the most peaceful decade in American history.
Well, there were a few factors. The viability of broken windows policing has been challenged substantially, but there are admittedly some benefits. The argument that I would make is that what you're really doing is you're forestalling the problem. There are socioeconomic conditions that increase criminality, not because it makes people worse people, but just because oftentimes crime isn't some direct indicator of poor moral conduct. Oftentimes it is a crime of necessity, or it is a crime born of the discontent and the apathy.
I
that
got to
people-
challenge you on that. What
Sure.
would be a crime of necessity today with the welfare state that we have? What would possibly be a crime of necessity?
We don't have a welfare
I know
state.
I can at least speak to personal experience that I knew some people involved in like they said they would sometimes peddle drugs, and they did it because while they may have been accounted for by the welfare state, their parents' medical bills weren't. Not sufficiently, not even close. Stuff like that. Now maybe legally, if that person got arrested, the law says they have to be. I could never morally condemn them. They were trying to save their mom, man.
But
So-
I got to push back on that.
Sure.
I mean, for sure it's anecdotal, but
it is. So it's not like a data point. You know?
I never understood this, having grown up on the South Side. Seeing people sell drugs is not the fastest and easiest way to make money for someone who's desperate. I mean, no joke.
Plasma sales? What would you say?
I made $140 per hour playing guitar in front of a baseball field. Now, I understand not everyone can play guitar.
Or skateboard.
Or skateboard. I knew a guy who said he just bought T-shirts. He went and bought bulk T-shirts. So the people who are selling drugs, they got to buy the drugs first, or they get a loan, and you can do the same thing with socks. And then people go on the side of the road and sell socks. I think the choice of committing a crime was a choice.
Well, it is. Well, hold on. It is always a choice, but what we're really talking about is the limits of determinism here. How much do we choose the things we do? You can make an argument that it's all. I mean, you're religious, of course, so you wouldn't have this argument. But
I wouldn't have anything close to this argument.
right from a secular perspective, you could make the argument that at the end of the day, the things we do are driven entirely by the chemical reactions in our brain, and therefore everything that we do from start to finish is just a combination of random molecular patterns and blah blah. We don't live our lives like that. Obviously, I make a choice to get dressed every day. We know how this works in practice. But in practice, we are also the product of our environment. And the fact that, for example, having a single parent while growing up
Yes.
is a pretty strong criminal indicator is a suggestion that, I mean, is it an indicator of a person's inherent moral worth that they were born with a single parent? Probably not. So that statistical difference has to be accounted for by the inevitable fact that environmental differences can lead to harsh outcomes.
The question is, though, do you then create a set of lack of enforcement to say that we're actually not going to enforce looting, where you had an entire article in National Public Radio, not saying you believe this, that says the case for looting, right? San Francisco's basically employed this, $900 or less, they're not going to prosecute you, right? Videos of them stealing
Yeah.
entire Walgreens, right?
Bad.
Not an exaggeration. And then you have, and just one other data point, just because of COVID, Europe's crime rates did not increase. Ours did. And we had a massive defund police, almost kind of we're going to be relaxed on criminality type movement. And this is the question, right? Which is, how many excuses or accommodations are we going to give for crime?
Well, we're not.
And I'm just
sorry.
just to finish is that my perspective obviously is very little to none. Crime's a necessity. I could think of one, maybe two examples where I would make a moral claim of a crime of necessity, and that would be a revenge crime if someone murdered your wife or your kid. Maybe.
No, that's crime of
I'm not saying
passion.
necessity. I'm saying
That's a
like
completely
moral
different.
accommodation where I could say I could see where they came from. Not necessity. Let me rephrase that. But the idea that in the welfare state that we have, with the private philanthropy kind of generosity we have, that shoplifting and arson and looting, mugging Barbara Boxer, that we should just say, you know, it's actually because of the
I
environment.
don't know why
they
you
grew up in.
pointed at me when you
No,
said
I'm not-
I have never mugged Barbara
I'm
Boxer.
saying that as an example.
Yeah, I don't mean to. I don't.
Was that you in San Francisco? Were you-
Where were you?
Yeah. No, I've gotten stolen from in San Francisco before. It was a very fun experience. That was back before YouTube too, so I couldn't afford to replace anything. Okay, a lot to respond to here. Emil Durkheim, cool guy, dead now, thought that crime was sociologically useful because it shows you where the antagonisms are between people's wants and the state's desires. So crime takes place where there's an agitation between what people are being compelled to do by whatever, their own behavior, their desires, and what the state will allow you to do. So, for example, during a food shortage, we can take like Ireland during the potato famine. There were, to put it lightly, quite a few cases of theft during that time because people needed food. They would do anything for it. So the crime of theft in that instance becomes a sociological indicator of a social need that isn't being met. Now today, of course, we do have, admittedly, a fairly weak but existent welfare state.
It's rather
we do
strong.
have,
It's very generous.
it's a little baby welfare
Multi-trillions
state.
of dollars every year.
Yeah, multi-trillion for America.
I will
Nah.
say
You can get
Quadrillions.
$70,000 in value a year. That's plenty.
I want a UBI. We can go way harder.
We do have
Sorry.
UBI. We just implemented it with the stimulus.
No,
No,
we
well,
don't.
oh, wait, hold on. Yes, the child
Yes, we
tax
did.
credits with well, no,
People
that's
got
really
cash
good.
checks. We have UBI now.
Well, it's not a long-standing program.
I'll
It's been a
admit that, but
temporary
we've
stimulus.
tried UBI and crime went up.
Well, hold on. Wait, hold on.
I just
Wait.
wanna-
So
I need to reject the
We
spurious.
send checks. People commit crimes. Huh.
Hold on. This is a spurious correlation, okay?
Yeah.
First of all, you will not be able to find any analysis that attributes the increase in crime to people getting their stimulus checks.
No, I'm saying it's the opposite. The argument you're making is that if people have a sociological need, they won't commit the crime. So people got money and they still committed crimes.
Yeah, but it doesn't always correspond one-to-one like that.
I
The reason
totally
why
agree.
people needed money is because they weren't getting any money from their jobs because they couldn't work their jobs. So people were still in a worse
Well,
position.
they also
than
got
would have been otherwise.
unemployment. Remember, very generous unemployment.
The unemployment started
plus
pretty generous.
$600 to $800, right? I think it was a week or a month, right? It was
It's
very
still
generous.
currently
That
at
run through, and
$300
not everyone is applicable for unemployment. There are a lot of conditions there that can make that difficult.
No,
to
they were
apply
very
for.
generous. They didn't
Well,
turn
hold
anyone
on, wait,
down
wait.
during
we're,
the lockdown.
We're being very spurious with our.
Well, we're very
correlations
wonky.
right now.
I'm sorry, I interrupted you. I'm just
Oh God, where was I?
something about some dead guy about how crime is helpful.
I love dead white guys. That's my. I actually don't know if Durkheim was white. So, I'm not pro-crime, not pro-criminal here. I'm pro leniency only insofar as I believe it helps to lower our recidivism. Sometimes it finds that it does. For example, you're in prison for 20 years. What do you know? You know the inside of a jail cell. The environment in prison is very bad at encouraging people to get their life together when they get out. And that's why so many people, they get out of prison, they have 6 months on the street before they're back in. Sometimes it's because they want to go back in. Prison's all they know. They did a movie about that. Sorry.
Shawshank Redemption.
And it was a good movie.
It's a great movie.
Yeah, which only serves my point. But with regards to like being lax on crime or whatever, there are a couple of things I think we should all agree to. Okay, first of all, well, maybe we wouldn't. Drugs is bad. We need to stop locking people up for weed, just flat out. I think that drugs in general should be treated like a medical issue. Portugal did that. They decriminalized all drugs. So
There's conflicting data on Portugal, but fine.
it's pretty promising. So you take like heroin. Nobody wants to be on heroin, okay? If you're on heroin, in the fleeting moments you have in between your little sessions, you know something's up. So you treat that like a medical issue. Say, hey, we have government offices, you want to come by. That helps. Far fewer overdose deaths. And those people, they go ahead, they become socially productive. Bam. No crime. They contribute to the economy. It just works better than locking them up.
I wanted to say something you mentioned with UBI, you mentioned with the unemployment, the stimulus. First of all, we've actually had a really hard time hiring for specific work, like labor stuff, because nobody wants to work. And no joke, like I've been having conversations like every other day, like, can we find some people? And it's like, we can't find anybody. We got signs up and down all throughout the area where it's like, come in, open interviews. We had over 800 flights canceled due to staffing shortages, and now we're facing fuel shortages because there's a trucker shortage. We're looking at this this unemployment stimulus thing where they're doing the $300 bonus. Now they're doing the child tax credit, which won't be for everybody. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing a correlation with massive job openings and people not taking these jobs.
I think it's phenomenal. Finally, the bargaining power is in the hands of the workers more so.
It's broken. Like the flights are shutting down. Nobody wants the jobs, even when they do increase the salaries.
So it's true, the flights are an issue, but here's what they don't tell you in the news briefs. So stock buybacks, something that many companies now do because of their decriminalization. The airline companies have spent an anomalous amount of their profits each year on stock buybacks to enrich their CEOs and shareholders, rather than on hiring more pilots. It seems the issue here is this is a simple supply-demand issue. People need to raise their wages. You see these news stories from time to time where it's like, I raised my wage to $15 an hour, and people showed up. And it's like, yeah, that is how economics works.
We had John Schnatter, Papa John, on the show, and he told us a story about a pizzeria where they were paying $35 an hour to some of their pizza cooks or bakers, because that was the line. He kept trying to find people, nobody would do it. He kept raising wages. Finally, he settled on $35 an hour. That means pizzas are going to basically more than double, because the wage they were paying before was like 15, and now they're over double what they were paying in labor. Their labor costs go up. They have no choice but to charge substantially more for pizza. In the short term, within a month or so, that might have an impact on those pizza makers. But the ripple effect is going to slam into everybody. All of a sudden, the contractor can't afford to take his family out for dinner. He can't afford to buy the food he wants, because the base level costs are going to start going up. Then the landlords aren't going to be able to hire the maintenance crews to fix the buildings. The landlords are on fixed pricing, which they can't change, which then results in a brick wall, a collapse.
I just want to say, what we're having right now is an unprecedented economic shock. For a year, nobody worked, or very few people worked. And people got used to staying at home. And as the government should, it should have done more, but as the government should, it took care of them a little bit. We have to ride this out. What are government funds for but riding us out through common crises? Better this than war. And now people are returning to work, and they're realizing work sucks. Work sucks everywhere. But in this country, compared to maybe some of our equally developed contemporaries, work really sucks. The work culture, our rate of overproductivity, Americans more than any other developed country, by the way, we push our workers hard. And you have favorable employment numbers, but you don't have favorable underemployment numbers. There are a lot of people who have jobs, but they have like 2 to 3 part-time jobs. They don't get their schedule for the next month until like 2 weeks before the end of the current one. They're constantly worrying about whether or not they're going to make their shifts line up to get enough hours to get the money they need to pay down their student debt along with their rent and everything. It sucks, and it's untenable, and we are in an era of unprecedented record profits for CEOs. So yes, I think the solution to this, and it'll be a rough one, that's for sure, is we should normalize higher wages. Maybe the solution to $15 an hour was never a federal mandate. Maybe it was the inevitable economic necessity of incentivizing workers.
Hard to disagree with a lot of that. I will say that the lockdowns were way too harsh and intense. I will say there is a Fifth Amendment argument to be made, though, that if the government forces you to not work, then you should be able to get something in return. The government cannot take something from you constitutionally and not pay you for it. That's the eminent domain argument, right?
Right.
Which was one of the best arguments for the stimulus package. I just think the lockdowns were far too severe and far too intense and really infringed on people's liberties and abilities to be able to take risks. I want to go a different direction. I just want to ask you a question. It's just more kind of about human nature. Do you think human beings are naturally good or naturally bad as human nature?
Tabula rasa. I really think we are. We
Blank
make people,
slate.
Maybe there's some inclination. We're hardwired to be social. I know that. We're also, at least to some extent, hardwired to be self-serving. The best society merges those two. The best interest for you is the best interest for everyone. The social contract, from now
So
until we
which
die.
Locke's, Rousseau's, or Hobbes? Which social contract?
I guess I would just say the ubiquitous philosophical term more so than
Well,
any
because
specific.
they all wrote on those terms, right?
Right,
And
and
they totally disagreed.
They
on
all
that.
thought different things of humans. They all thought
Hobbes was at a very dark view. Rousseau very positive. Locke was more neutral. I'm just curious.
socialists tend to think that human beings are fundamentally positive, but I reject that.
That's why I'm
because-
curious, because you see way too cynical for that.
Well, the implicit suggestion to that, to me, is that socialists think their system would only work if everyone was nice, and I don't believe that. I think that the best economic systems will work when everyone is an absolute POS, just a dirty, horrible human being, and
very
you can
Hobbesian of
incentivize
you.
them. Well, but it should. Maybe humans are amazing, but the best systems should survive human greed.
I want to ask you a very simple and general question.
Uh-oh. Those are the worst ones to answer.
It is. Do you think some people are better than other people?
Can I add a bit of nuance to that answer?
Answer however you want.
I think that some people have been developed to be more moral and of better character.
Oh no. Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't mean moral.
Just better,
Just-
like they're taller.
That's it.
Oh,
However, but I think your interpretation of the question is part of the answer.
by any metric, there will always be people who are better than others. Always, perhaps, by some combination of environment and genetics. I just hope that we can all ride along by side each other.
I agree. I think I mentioned this before the show. If you were to ask anybody on the left or the right, what did you want? It'd be like for everyone to prosper, for people to be successful, to pull people out of poverty, things like that. I guess the issue is disagreeing on how we get there.
Well, I think I'm not sure if we want the same thing. I want more a preservation and conservation of what we already have.
Do you want socialism?
Absolutely not.
Oh, no. Slight ideological
No,
disagreement.
but come on.
I mean,
If-
but
if
like
I-
we
if I-
don't need to play the word games. Go
No,
ahead.
I'm-
Why
as
do
I
you
do.
want to preserve?
Well, I think that we have something beautiful, unique, and exceptional. And I take the more Hobbesian view of human nature, which is we're brutish and nasty and awful and cruel. And the fact we've been able to build something decent and civil is pretty remarkable.
But
And-
are you saying that we have a good system
A great system.
and people thrive from the system?
Yeah, I think people flourish and thrive. I think that a rights-based system is naturally the best way to govern.
Do you want people to be stripped of their rights, imprisoned, brutalized, impoverished?
Of course not. No. And I mean, the sacrificing of rights is something that usually has to be earned negatively, like murdering somebody.
So this is what I mean, because I think I could ask you the same question. Do you want people to be brutalized, impoverished, imprisoned,
Of course not.
taking their rights away?
But I would never want to grow complacent. You're both familiar with the Marxian theory of dialectic materialism.
You mean
correct?
Hegel's
I'm
theory?
Oh no, he had the dialectic, and we built on it, or he
We?
built.
Eight,
We.
five
I'd love to get
star
into
facts.
No.
I really want to get
1120.
into the Marx
Okay.
thing because I'm
I said
super
he.
fascinated by it.
No, I just want to say,
Five star
the
to
theory.
level
I mean,
20.
put simply, I guess, is that human society, the human project, it evolves as a product of antagonism, grinding antagonism between people.
So
In
the
Marxian view,
character
are
very-
different.
that's
phase
very Hegelian.
5.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, he was a student of Hegel.
I know he was part of this. He was the young Hegelians.
Yeah,
and he won
no,
the argument.
Well,
right?
no, I'm not. Well, you're not. I'm just saying, like, he would get mad at you if you said he was Hegelian influence, but I don't think I would. Hegel was a smart guy. I just can't read his work because.
The phenomenology of spirit is impossible to read.
Thank you. All right. I was worried you're going to make fun of me. I just want to say.
No, it's really hard. He made the
It's a
very
brick.
simple complex.
Yeah. He was
We
very
agree
good at
on
that.
something.
I just want to say, sorry. I just want to, the project of humans moving forward. I think that antagonism fuels it, but in the best way. Not antagonism like war, but antagonism in the sense that we look at our ideas, our values, and we challenge them.
So I just want to say something we disagree on. I don't think humanity's a project.
do you think we're headed towards something better than what we have today?
Probably not.
Oh.
I think that we're probably engaging in the second law of thermodynamics currently. That we're untangling. We're going to chaos, not order.
See, this to me, this is the thing, and I'm not trying to patronize. Conservatives have been shown to be more fearful on average, and I think if they thought that way, it would be very warranted.
But some fears are legitimate. You know,
Certainly.
Winston Churchill's fears about the evil Germans were legitimate.
No, I'm not. No, fear is not always illegitimate, and there are elements of this. I think, though, that if society is to collapse, it would probably be from climate change more so than like the.
Oh, come on, you don't believe that.
No, for sure. You can. We'll see it, assuming COVID doesn't get you. We'll live to see some
Assuming.
pretty
You
severe.
hear that?
We see it right now.
You know, my problem is,
Oh,
you know, like I see all the news, I see all the arguments about climate change, and I'm like, I understand them. And then you get Obama buying beachfront property, you get the celebrities flying in airplanes, and I'm like, how am I supposed to trust any of
Bernie.
these people?
Got to get Bernie. Guy rode the train to work. He didn't have to do that. Bernie's the man.
True revolutionary. So,
Well, just to
Yeah,
finish
Bernie
the point. I'm sorry
was-
because I kept getting sidetracked.
but the
because-
idea of the human project is super interesting to me because that's a collision point we're going to have. So
Yeah, well, I'd like to think. I mean, people have always said this is the best it gets. You know, the Postmaster General back in was it the Postmaster General? Or was it the patent?
No,
office
the patent
master?
office 1900. All the patents have been made.
Yeah, yeah,
And I'm
and-
not saying it's the best it's been. I'm not saying improvement is not possible.
Maybe we can
Don't get
make
me pop-
little improvements, but when I try to put myself in the shoes of men past, you know, I don't know, somebody in feudal China. And to them, what I live in today would have been incomprehensible to them in every imaginable sense, every conceivable way. But their arguments for the permanence of society then would have been better than mine today because they would have lived in a stable feudal society for millennia. And today, I now am here using technology that would have been
Fire and
alien to
ice.
humans 20 years ago.
I think about like
Fire, and ice.
the Cultural Revolution. I think about the revolution in Russia. And you mentioned the conservatives tend to be more fearful, and I think there's history that shows us things can go
It's a
bad.
weird
You can
mix.
have something that's good, not great, could probably be better, and then end up with an unchecked movement that results in millions dead.
For sure.
20 to 40 million, I think, in the Cultural Revolution.
it's-
We had Lily Tong Williams on the other
it's-
night, and she's telling us these stories. They're scary.
Always hindsight, right? Because people thought this about every major event in social progress in America's history as well. The breakup, the Confederacy, the Civil War, the fight to abolish slavery, sure. You know, suffrage for women, yes. The Civil Rights Act, yes. Gay marriage, yes. Every time we make a step forward, you're probably anti-gay marriage, right? Because are you?
I'm pro-traditional marriage.
Okay, sure,
Yeah.
right. Anti-gay marriage.
Pro-tradition. Yeah.
Gotcha. Every
Different
time.
definitions.
One man, one woman. Yeah.
Every time we take a step forward, well, we agreed on the 3-parent household before.
I disagreed on
That was
polyamory, actually.
50% more efficient than the previous method.
And
That's
tw-
not
and-
actually
and,
a study,
and,
is it?
and 10 times more chaotic
are you actually
and
citing
way
something?
more perverse.
Possibly
I'm not actually
linear
citing anything.
It was possibly not a linear growth pattern with
Yeah, maybe
parents in the house.
It's actually exponential. It just goes up forever.
Yeah, that's very.
Albert Einstein had 12 parents. It's
yeah,
just,
by the time you hit 12 parents, there should the children just a god. By the way, just a
Yeah,
little
it's like
a
the
glowing-
warp scale.
very,
Star Trek.
very
It's-
ubermensch, but continue, yeah.
Sorry. It always feels like everyone argues like this is the best it gets, and any future steps would be treacherous. But then we always make that next step. I don't know if America's going to be around forever. We're a young country, and countries far older than ours have fallen in the lifetime of America. So I can't look at what we have today, or the people that I live with, or the values that I believe in, and assign to them a feeling of permanence. But I can say this: I fear stagnation. And every country that has ever set itself upon stagnation has always died. Every time. Every country always seeks to better itself. And maybe that road to betterment leads to ruin, but the path of stagnation is always ruinous.
I agree. Our culture has stagnated severely. One thing I always bring up is like Christmas music written in the 50s. We still play it nonstop over and over again.
Thank you.
Movies have become repetitive, redundant, reboots. It's devolved from where we had these interesting pieces of art to just regurgitated crap over and over again.
Can I just take some exception with your argument? First of all,
Certainly.
there is this kind of revisionist belief that somehow conservatives, in the traditional sense, were against some of those social movements, which is just not true. Now, I'm not saying you'd be a Confederate, and I'm not even getting to the party switching thing. But there is a direct lineage between hyper-focusing on racial politics in the 1860s and the 1920s, and some of the people on the American left that are just completely obsessed with American, racial politics.
It's equality versus hierarchy, right?
But what do you mean by that?
Well, back then, the slave owners wouldn't have been like, I'm really obsessed with race. Well, equality. Now, obsession with race can be pernicious in many ways, but I think there's a pretty big difference between being obsessed with the idea of racial equality and being obsessed with
I think
racial
it's
domination.
equally as pernicious, just they don't have the power to implement it. But we kind of already did that.
Do you
whole
think
discussion.
I'd do that? Like
You? No, I don't think you would. I mean, I don't know you well enough. You seem rather decent.
I try my best,
but
like
I wouldn't give power to Nicole Hannah-Jones.
I don't know who that is.
She founded the 1619 Project.
Oh, I just read the thing. I don't know
we
much
have
of the
we have a
meta-knowledge.
constitution to prevent us against people like that. What I'm saying though is that, for example, I'm not against social change. I mean, I'd love to abolish abortion, for example. I'd love to put fathers back in the home.
No doubt.
So conservatives are not necessarily always saying, no, we don't want to improve, we want to stagnate. We want the correct form of social change.
So let me ask this then. Let's get to the core of it then. What values are you looking to maximize?
This is a great question.
Not just like morality, because that could mean the same thing or different things to anyone. But if you were to look at a society and were asked to assess its worth, what metrics would you look towards?
It's ability to defend those that can't defend themselves.
Okay.
Charity, generosity, integrity, faith to your creator, the ability to pass down good and moral values to the next generation, one that believes in work, and one that believes in the cause of the nation above the self.
All right.
I've got an idea.
I think that's a
with
fairly collectivist point, that last one, though, wouldn't it be?
Well,
God, the nation above itself?
I mean,
Stalin
you could call it collectivist, but I wouldn't say the state. I'd say the idea of the nation, right? So there's two different things, and those are conflated sometimes by libertarian socialist types, which is a walking contradiction. I'd love to ask you about that.
Sure.
But just like, it's kind of just being
I
like
might
a Christian
answer it-
atheist,
I
right?
might answer it when you're done, by the way, because
Yeah.
I think my follow-up might could touch
Yeah,
on that.
but the state is a creation of the people. The people are the country. That's why our Constitution, the preamble, says we the people, not we the federal government, right? So the people are the nation. And so that's why I differentiate between the two. Do you have a loyalty? Do you have a belief that you want to create something bigger than yourselves? I think that's a moral good.
To me, and I mean this without meaning to hyperbolize, but to me that's always strung rather fascist. The myth of the common man, the people, the Volk, you know? The idea that there is a state, and Germany was a state, of course, but Hitler didn't really appeal to the state. It was the concept of the fatherland that he really hit on, and the people were a beating heart of the fatherland. They were an instrumental organ. And to me, the problem with this is that when you get down to it, this thought process, this mentality, it drives men to do terrible, terrible things. Because interpersonally, all of the chemical effects of empathy kick in. I look at you, I see you. But you start bringing in concepts like the nation, the fatherland, and it becomes very easy to convince people to compel themselves towards courses that they would otherwise not.
So expected you to use a 1930s reference earlier, so congratulations.
No,
'Cause
well,
it is-
I'm only
it's
saying,
just-
I'm not calling you a
and-
fascist.
and-
I'm only
no,
saying
I know,
that
you did do the correct, I didn't mean to hyperbolize, but there's other nations today that have those values that we would never call fascist, like Japan. Japan has very strict immigration.
Well, I think Korea is actually a better example, to be honest.
I really don't like either of those countries for the reasons that
You
I've
don't like
described.
Korea?
I think they're both deeply
love
conservative countries.
I
that-
agree with you.
Right.
They're
yeah.
wonderful.
And I think they do so in part because there's a degree of anti-individualism in the subservience they all expect of the common good. Now, it's funny. I feel like our roles are being reversed a little bit here.
Isn't
but
that interesting?
the common good isn't something I appeal to. For me, the value I want to
No,
maximize.
I just appeal to the good,
the good. Sure, the
which
good
is two
for-
different things.
Leave.
is freedom. That's
Obviously,
what I
I
care about
did
most.
not
And that's what
think that
libertarian
went through.
socialism is about. There are many types of freedoms, positive and negative. If I might indulge very briefly, like, is a man thrown to a lawless desert without food, water, or clothing free? Really asking.
So probably no,
I agree. He's free to die.
but that's an extreme example,
Sure.
not applicable in modern wealthy America.
No,
or
but-
any Western nation.
But it's a philosophical base.
It's also a Rousseauian argument. Man's born free, and he, spends the rest of his life in chains. It's
Right.
just anti-commercial in nature.
Well, no, but it's a base philosophical argument because it's true they're lawless. There's nothing preventing him from doing anything in that environment, but he has no ability to act on
but
his
do you know what he
desires.
does have? Consciousness.
Well, sure.
That
So that's
is-
a natural rights doctrine that I will defend.
Well, I mean, I like consciousness too. The only point that I'm getting at is when it comes to people's freedom and the ability for people to protect their freedom, this is what I care about. It's what Marx cared about. If you actually read what he wrote, and
I have. I've read Das Kapital. I've read the Manifesto.
Then
And
you-
guess what? He was right about some things.
then you know.
But not everything.
He didn't
And he
talk
was really wrong
about equality. He didn't write on equality. He wrote on freedom because he believed that society was a very complex, interlocking network of systems that in some ways liberated men and in other ways enslaved them.
But do you know what he got wrong? He got wrong that sometimes people can be free for other devices that they are not able to regulate. They can be free not from alcoholism, drug addiction, some sort of any other sort of perverse addiction. The idea of freedom is a very libertarian.
But I
view of
agree with
freedom.
that, though.
No, I
So
know you do.
the
I-
greatest
I say
society-
that. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Just the greatest society is one where a man is born and there are as few things as possible preventing him from doing whatever he wants for the rest of his life.
I totally disagree.
So long as, of course, he doesn't deprive others of the ability to do the same.
So I think that's a miserable society.
Freedom?
No, that's not freedom. That's licentiousness or degeneracy. That's chaos.
What is degeneracy? I like men.
How about pedophilia?
Okay. Well, obviously
You said
that would
whatever
infringe-
he wants. Is
as long as
pedophilia
they
a
don't-
freedom vouch?
As long as they don't infringe on the rights of others. I'm sure you could believe. I would believe
Well,
that.
so then,
infringes
so
on the
there
rights of
are
others.
limits on freedom, is what you're saying. It's not this Wild West
Yeah, well,
campaign.
as
So
long
where do you
as you-
get those limits from?
Well, obviously, you would probably have to have a pretty complex interlocking legal system to determine what we agree upon as like a reasonable limits we can place on people's behavior. We have that now to an extent.
No, I know. So like pedophilia, bad.
that
right?
would be a bad thing.
Okay. Kidnapping,
That would be a bad thing.
rape.
That would be a bad thing.
Why do you think those things are bad?
I think they're bad because you're stripping other people of the ability to do that which they will. With all those examples, you're inflicting harm on a person.
How about dealing drugs?
I think that dealing drugs is a person's freedom, as is taking a
But
person's.
you're taking
What
some-
about dealing drugs to kids?
Dealing drugs to kids, I think I would disagree with that, probably because I think there's something exceptional about addictive substances and children. That being said, I think a lot of stuff would apply to children specifically. Contract law. Kids can't sign contracts.
So
But there's nothing
do you
wrong
see
with
what I'm getting at?
contracts.
Eventually, you do agree that a conservative framework is necessary.
But I don't think that's a conservative framework because there are other things.
It's
I care
not a
about that you would
conservative
always
framework.
disagree with, like collective ownership of the means of production.
yeah, I totally disagree.
Which,
I think private property and freedom are linked together.
which
Here's-
would give workers the most freedom possible.
We've definitely gone along because it was just
But
so,
this has
so
been
it was
helpful,
fantastic.
right?
It was
It
fantastic.
It feels like it's been 5
Oh
minutes.
yeah, I know.
I
We
know,
keep
right,
going.
right. And Ian, you've collected a bunch
Jeez,
of
it's
great.
late.
Like 50, yeah, at least.
So right.
I'm going to use the restroom. Is that okay?
Go away.
All right, yeah, go do it
It's
to
going
it.
to take like 100 seconds.
Yeah.
You can time me.
I'm kind of interested in what you think about. I think humans are inherently destructive by nature, and that if you took a human and put him in a room with a bunch of small animals and plants, over time, his hunger, purely because of hunger, ultimately, he would destroy and consume all of those animals and all of those plants. And then if you put another human in there, one of those would eventually destroy and consume the other human.
I do think that we are maybe inherently expansionist. I think that might be a defining trait of our species.
Life.
It's I mean, we conquered the world, and God willing, we survive. 1,000 years from now, we'll conquer the stars, and that's unique to us. Other animals don't do that. I don't know if that's a good thing. Maybe everything would have been better.
They do this. Every animal does. The issue is
Build
that
spaceships?
no. Expansion.
Oh, yeah. But
Not build spaceship. That'd be cool though. You know, dolphins taking off.
over time, the limits of their abilities constrain them to a given area, a given population. But we clearly haven't been kept in that way.
Intelligence
We're
has
too
separated
smart.
us from that from the equilibrium. A lion chasing a gazelle. The gazelle, runs faster. The lion has to run faster. The zebras and the stripes are confusing. Some get away, some don't. There's a natural adaptation process. We know what evolution is. But humans, we adapt instantly. We are like, hey, that bird's flying. I got an arrow.
And we have, and there are. I just want to say, we're talking about evolution.
Oh, yeah, not a controversial
That's
topic.
quick.
No,
Yeah.
well, in a non-controversial way. Believe it or
Yes.
not, you'll have to catch the behind-the-scenes release. I just want to say that I don't have much optimism for the human condition. I'm not like a huge optimist about this. We are, I
Yeah,
think,
me neither.
very potentially destructive. I just think that we also experience, or we're better receptive to reward incentives than any other thing.
Ian's got a bunch of questions.
Yes.
So for
Yeah.
everybody who super chatted, we were having Ian. We mentioned in the beginning. Go through and try and find really good questions. A lot of people are saying really awesome things. I want to read one that's not a question real quickly. It's from Adam Schrader, who said, "So far, this whole conversation reminds me of friendly bar discussions 10 years ago. I miss that world. Thank you, Vosh and Charlie, for being excellent. Thank you, Tim, for steel manning. You all have leader demeanors." I know a lot of people disagree with each other, especially in the chat. Not everyone gets along, but I think it's a fantastic conversation.
Thank you,
so
Tim. Thank you, Charlie.
Ian's got some questions.
Let me bring them to you.
And then afterwards, if we still have time permitting, I would like to do the member segment and then personally be more involved than I've been for the most
Yes,
part.
sorry, we've been.
Well, no, that was kind of the point.
Back to
Yeah.
arm
There's
wrestling.
there's a
you know.
million things. I'm like, and I did interject. You guys know I did.
Thanks, Ian.
Okay,
Thank you, Ian.
these are some pretty good ones. So you just said press. Okay, there we go. So Ian's pulled some super chats. M asks, please ask each guest if they agree or disagree with the statement. Abortion breaks the non-aggression principle and why.
I mean, obviously, yeah. I think abortion is immoral, and we should do our best to eradicate it.
I don't really believe in the NAP. I understand people's discomfort with abortion. I think that unfortunately it's a legal necessity as a byproduct of some very compelling personhood arguments I've heard in the past, which I would have to read up on again before reciting.
Can I ask a question? When do you think life begins?
I don't know what life is.
So how about your life? You have life right now. When did your life begin?
I don't remember the first 6 months of my life. I genuinely don't
Looking
know.
at the development of a human life, when would you say that begins?
I know when human bodies develop. The genuine answer that I have is that I think that it's always going to be dictated somewhat by intuition. The intuitive answer from me is life begins at birth. That's my intuitive. If you asked me, like, that's what feels right, but I'm sympathetic to other perspectives.
What about when DNA is formed?
Well, that would be a conception, right? Or at least right after. Well, that's not what, obviously not, it's not the metric that I would look at.
How about heartbeat?
That's 6 weeks? No,
As
earlier.
early as 6 weeks, could be as early as as late as 6 weeks, early as 25 days.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, no. Yeah, no, these are interesting metrics. I think that my understanding of consciousness is more of an emergent property of experience, more so than it is. I would have to reread. It's been a while since I've read up on this.
You know what I love is you said, when do you think life begins? That was your question. I love how framing changes everything. Watch, ask me now.
Tim, when does life begin?
I think it was when proteins formed and started self-replicating in the primordial. Oh, you mean conception?
Right.
You see, like it's interesting how framing changes everything.
To me, it's more, I guess, for me, because like any cell in our body is alive. There is life and DNA in any bit of skin off my fingertip.
I wasn't meaning
So-
to poke at you or anything.
No,
was just
no,
like,
I know.
The
I would-
framing
So
is
I would
yeah,
only say
when,
to me-
when is a life worthy of protection begin?
That's a difficult question. To me,
That's a better way to word it.
to me, that has to be a legal question because protection has to be arbitered by an entity, and it can't be. And for me, that would probably be at birth. I've heard people make convincing philosophical arguments that there are times after birth when you're not even a person, and I've heard people make convincing arguments for conception. But if you're talking about a legal entity, the birth thing seems to be the line that's the easiest to distinguish. And there are other legal concerns as well. But this is an issue that I think well, I always support like a pro-choice argument. The philosophy behind it is something I'm a little more
I'm just
open to.
So is it more on the size of the being, or the level of development of the being, or the environment of the being, or the degree of dependency? Which one do you think out of those things is the reason why you say birth? I'm just
I
curious.
think the degree of dependency is legally worthwhile, but for consciousness, I think it's more about it being an emergent property of experience.
So is it okay then if we just basically pull the plug on all the people that are kind of comatose and cucumbers on machines? They really don't have self-consciousness, and they're very dependent.
Well, I mean, legally we do believe that, because if you have
Oh, it's
a
very
legal-
tricky in the courts.
It is, but it's not the same as murdering a person. If there's conservatorship over a person who's brain dead, there are instances where you will be allowed to pull the plug. This is
You can't do so without an arbiter, though. You can't just call in and say, just pull the plug. That is murder.
oh well, yeah, you can just yank it, of course.
You have to get approval and
assess.
process
Yeah,
and- yeah.
But it does indicate that legally and morally there is ambiguity with regards to the
No,
relationship.
but it shows that
between
there
right
is
to
an
life.
arbiter, though. That you have to go through a system of checks. I didn't mean to derail Tim.
Sorry,
it's
yeah.
just- I want to make sure we can get to as many questions
course.
as possible.
Yeah, yeah.
That was great. That was great. Camilla Mamani says, WTF, a libertarian socialist, is like a meat eater vegan.
Libertarianism was actually a left-leaning ideology. It was co-opted in the early 20th centuries by capitalists. But actually before that, libertarianism was exclusively in the purview of socialists. And I believe what they believed, that freedom is the greatest human good as long as it doesn't infringe upon others, and that the best way to achieve that freedom is through democracy. We have political democracy, flawed as it is. Economic democracy is something we should also strive for.
I'll tell you this. Left libertarian quadrant is the hardest quadrant to be in. You have the only persuasion tactics. The only, if you're a left libertarian, which exists, you're basically saying, I like socialism. Now I have to convince people that it's the right thing and they'll agree with me. And people just won't. People won't.
I find left libertarians less threatening to the American way of life
Oh, thank you.
because you have a general distaste for authoritarianism.
Well, for what it's
the
worth,
right has money. They're like, well, you won't agree with me, but I can give you money. And they're like,
The
"You-
left does too. Sorry, go ahead.
No, just want to say, for what it's worth, there are some people who call themselves socialists who I actually think would agree probably more with you than with me. Like people who support China, for example. China's not socialist. It's a rampant
yeah,
capitalist
it's
state.
a
that's largely-
cronyist state is really what it is.
Right. Well, I mean, whatever you want to call it, it's certainly not what I want, you know? So there are people who would defend that, and I can't help but think, like, okay, these are conservative,
came
what
down
do you call them,
here.
traditionalist social positions. And
Yes.
you defend, a strong state with a strong common will towards the betterment of the state and a free market. I don't know. Maybe that'll be what would they call that? The Red Brown Alliance? No, I'm joking.
In a way,
So I've got a question for Charlie.
Sure.
Oh,
I'm not sure. I'm not familiar. Are you familiar with Alden's theory?
No.
You're not? Oh, okay. Then I guess I won't answer that question then. All right.
I
Then the next question would be for both of you is what is the single biggest political issue for each of you? And Charlie?
Alden's theory doesn't exist.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question.
joke.
Political
I'm sorry
issue-
for 2022.
Oh, like I could
Yeah.
take that any way, I guess, right? What should Republicans run on, I guess, or like
Yeah,
just
how
what
would-
is the biggest issue? Yeah, I mean, man, it's I'd say the way we do elections in our country is definitely up there. Big tech is massive. Immigration is huge. But I think even something more fundamental that I think we almost achieved it tonight, which is that we're about to tear this country apart. And I think dialogue is something that is so beautiful and is so complex and almost spiritual in nature that if we don't have dialogue with people that you fundamentally disagree with, then there's really not a middle ground until you start ripping each other apart. And I'm really afraid of that.
What's the biggest issue of 2022?
I agree that the political rift is almost insurmountable seeming. The last time we had one this bad was pre-Civil War, and we didn't really fix it. We just had a civil war, and people were still mad after. So I hope that doesn't happen. I don't think we're going to have a civil war, by the way. There are some people. I think that at the end of the day, there's a big difference between the problems we're told to care about and the problems we're willing to fight about. And I'm not entirely sure if I know where those lines are, but I know there's a difference. With regards to what I'd care about, for me, it has to be climate change. I know a lot of people roll their eyes at this stuff, but like you can take a look at the polar ice caps. You can take a look at the weather disasters we've been having, increasing both in frequency and intensity. This isn't look, think of it this way, okay? I believe in American industry, all right? It's a little too late for us to be first comers, but if we really wanted to, we could subsidize the hell out of green energy. You think we're doing it now? Triple that, okay? Really lay the groundwork. In 20 years, we'll be selling the rest of the world the energy they'll need to survive.
You know what really breaks my heart is the video I made before the actual Green New Deal, talking about how we needed a Green New Deal, and then AOC's Green New Deal was like equity and college and healthcare, and then the botched FAQ, and I was like, I'm talking about why are we spending money on war when we could be researching green technologies and more efficient energy, thorium salt reactors, things like that, get fusion to ignite. Instead, we get this like racial equity garbage bill.
I do like the Green New Deal, but I had this problem too with that teachers union board, the one that affirmed CRT, said they're going to
The National Education Association.
Yeah, it was also a union, or maybe it was
The NEA,
yeah.
that's what it is.
Okay,
It's
yeah.
the largest teacher union in the country.
Because and first of all, what they said wasn't CRT, but I'll take
They
that up
did
with them
use
if
the
I ever.
words.
They did, and still they got that wrong. So
they
if I
don't
ever
put it in
argue with
actually-
them,
They mean what we've been talking, wokeism.
yeah, I just, oh man, it's because the theory is cool, you know.
That's what I'm talking
you wouldn't
about.
agree with it, but it's interesting.
Finish what you're saying. I want to say something about this really
I
quick.
do not think it's cool, and
Well,
I think
no, the theory is awesome. It's like the
rad.
theory of communism. We should have a class, a philosophy class, where you learn about critical race theory. Teaching it in practice to children is a different idea.
So I actually, in response to my absolute failure in giving you the adequate response in our last conversation, did pull up Critical Race Theory by Kimberly Crenshaw and actually read what she was talking about. And I think the idea of the oppressed versus oppressor in race is a horrible thing when we're trying to get away from that. And I had a conversation with an actual racist recently, and the ideas to me are absolutely nonsensical to base things on race. Coming from an actual racist who was advocating for the same things in that book, I was like, so you're happy with this stuff? Like, well, no, because the wrong side's in charge. And then I had to explain to them, like, I do not see the world the way you do. And he says, well, that's the trouble with race mixing. And that's, and no, but that's exact. This is what I see when I talk to people who are in favor of critical race theory's core ideology and white nationalists. They tell me the same garbage in different ways.
Look, I have always been a firm supporter of the idea that the ideas should be what's criticized, not like the people who make them. Sometimes, for example, people will make fun of me because I talk on class issues and I'm from Beverly Hills, and I accept the jibing. You know, it's fine. But I think anyone can speak in this stuff. To be fair, this is idpol, and everyone does it to an extent. Candace Owens will deflect criticisms of racism by saying she's black. We've all seen people do this. The only thing I wanted to say, because I have to move back like 6 points here, is that with regards to the teachers board you spoke on, and the Green New Deal, I sometimes feel like the left is a little bit bad when it comes to mixing all their causes. If they, speaking of separatism, if they kept things a little bit more stringent, a little more focused, maybe they could get people to agree on some of it. But if every push for climate change is also every other progressive note, and every push for racial equality is every other progressive note, it feels like it's like an all or nothing package, and I think that can put some people off.
I wanted to just clarify quickly and to inject my id poll, as you mentioned, Candace Owens would do it. I would, and a lot of people are always mentioning, Tim Pool mentions he's mixed race, and I'm like, maybe that's why you'll understand when people are writing like whiteness this and people of color that. I'm like, I don't exist in that world because I've been discriminated against by all of these people. And when that person said to me, the perils of mixed racing or race mixing, he's talking about me personally, saying, I don't understand the tribalist worldview of racialists and identitarians because I've never experienced what it means to be in a racial tribe. And you know what? I think he's right. And that's why I love the classical liberal view of opposition to racism, judging people based on the content of their character, not the color of their skin. Because I see this world that's being built critical of whiteness. That includes me, but then it's always the negative. Every experience I've ever had, be it from white nationalists or from critical race theorists, is that you are bad for whatever reason. I do not want to live in a world where race is the predeterminant policy maker or factor on these things.
Completely misunderstood
and you know what?
the argument.
For the progressives to come out right now and claim civil rights and say we did all these things and then tell me I now face that detriment, I'm like, you know what, man, my grandparents, civil rights activists, race mixers, my actual parents also mix in races and stuff, and I'm like, I can now look at the progressives who are putting a detriment on my life and insulting me no matter what I do, and the white nationalists who vandalized my home as a child. And it's the world that you're taking credit for, that you're trying now to put a detriment for people like me.
Well, it could be a matter of perception as well. I've read a lot of like academic critiques of whiteness, which isn't white people. It's a sort of
That's not true at all.
Well, it's an academic term to describe affectations associated with white people culturally, more so than the actual act of being
But black
white.
and brown literally means black and brown.
If there was
Yeah.
a critique
Well,
of
it's whiteness.
blackness, what would you think of that?
Well, if it was an academic term used in that way, then I would think of it the same way. But since there isn't such a term, I would have to be critical. If you look, regardless of the etymology of the term, in concept, it's meant to be like, the term toxic masculinity?
Yeah, I've heard it once or twice.
A couple times, When I read stuff like that, it's interesting stuff, I don't think of this all men are bad, all masculinity is bad. It's more of a salient critique of certain cultural trends. Now, the problem that I have is essentialism. Some people will take this on both the left and the right, and they'll think of it as an individual critique, which it should never be used as. If I were to say something like, imagine I'm reading MLK back in 1953, MLK had some things to say about white people back during his era. He would say that, the whites of this era are unconcerned with the plight of black people, except he didn't say black people. And this is a non-essentialist critique. He didn't believe in racial essentialism. He wouldn't go up to an individual white person and judge them negatively for that. But he understood that as a cultural trend, this is indeed a pattern he recognized.
So massive group stereotyping.
Well, massive group stereotyping that's been done by every civil rights movement to have ever existed. Maybe the issue isn't the stereotyping so much as the way it's being applied and used. If the stereotyping is, I notice there's a big difference in abolitionist thoughts between white and black people in Southern America in 1852, maybe that's the kind of stereotyping that can be used for good. Also, stereotyping by definition is assuming characteristics of an individual because of their part of a
That's
group.
close to what MLK was saying when he said white liberals. I mean,
But
that's
you wouldn't apply it to an individual, though. I mean, I've made comments about groups, people who play League of Legends, degenerates, the lot of them. But I know people who play League of Legends, and when I talk about people who play League of Legends, I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about people who play League of Legends.
So I want to ask you about the climate change thing.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think is a bigger threat, climate change or China?
Climate change.
To the world or to America?
To you, the world, America.
I think it's still climate change. I think China's probably going to replace us as the dominant power. I'm not really happy about that because we're more democratic than what they are in terms of our political structure. If they had a better democracy, I might favor them over us because I don't really care about national allegiances. But we are more democratic than them, so... The climate change thing is an issue that will affect us all, though. The big one's going to be climate refugees. There are a lot of low-lying coastal communities that are going to be inhospitable to life in about 40 years, and they're going to move out into populated areas, and there's going to be border conflicts and war. It's going to be tough.
We're not gonna be able to get to every single.
I'm
Super
so
Chatter
sorry.
question.
That's
No.
on me.
It's no big deal because I think it's more important that you guys are having these arguments. So I'm not going to interrupt you when you're actually debating the ideas. That's the point. But a lot of people did super chat. Just know that you guys, super chat's greatly appreciated. There's a whole lot of them.
Yeah.
We love you.
So,
guys rock.
but I've got one critical for you, Vosh.
Hit me up.
Nasho Nabo says, Vosh is a black person who grew up in majority white areas. Those conversations are very demoralizing to be a part of. I don't doubt your intentions, but it's best to speak to people affected by your ideas before trying to implement them as our white savior.
I don't appreciate the white savior critique because that's just the opposite end of idpol, isn't it? Saying that I'm less inclined to talk about these issues because I'm white. Like, that's kind of like the opposite thing.
I agree. I think address the idea.
I agree with that too.
Yeah.
But with regards to like the implementation here, obviously like social problems like this, addressing them is going to be contentious no matter what. I don't know if there's a way to do this, to fix any problem, even the most obvious problems. Today we think slavery, obviously that's bad, but clearly there was some disagreement. With issues like this, there's going to be disagreement. I don't know if there's a perfect way to handle it. Anything is going to mix people up. I have to balance that concern with the hope that in the future people become more accepting of these issues. A good example of that would be like gender stuff, for example. In terms of like, if you look at it generationally, from boomers to Gen Z people are like 30 times as likely to know a person who identifies as trans or non-binary or whatever. And for that reason, conversations on those subjects have become significantly easier just because people have been exposed to the concept. Maybe in time this will be easier. Maybe I'll fail, we'll all fail, and it won't be. But I am sorry that these conversations are difficult.
All right, let's see. Well, I got to be honest. The overwhelming majority of the super chats are just saying thank you for having a conversation.
Those are the overwhelming majority ones that I copied.
No. I was looking at
yeah,
it.
they are,
I thought you had
They're also
all
right.
the questions, so I was like, okay, I can see everyone very excited. That's why I read the first one. And some people have pointed out that in a conversational format, you are both less derisive and divisive in your arguments.
Funny how that
All
works.
YouTubers should
Try to
take
be
account
nice
of
in my
that.
streams.
So here's an interesting and kind of specific question. Joshua Alley asks, should courts decide cases based on rule of law and precedents, or decide each case based entirely on rationality and morality?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, it needs to be a balance. Precedence definitely matters, especially in the American system. And
So
the
I
idea of the whole
think
third
it's-
branch of government really kind of came into question with
whole
Marbury
bunch of
versus
these.
Madison, with the first Supreme Court Justice of the United States, John Jay, I believe, who was one of the co-authors of the Federalist Papers. Precedent is important, but it's not everything. And this is a super important thing that conservatives need to talk more about, which I think you would agree with, Vaush, is that precedents can be really bad. Dred Scott was awful precedent. It was really bad. It was 7 Democrat U.S. Supreme Court justices, 2 Democrats, that said black people were not people. And that precedent was in law, basically, for many decades until it was eventually reversed, largely because of the Brown versus Board of Education. But precedent also is helpful so that you don't turn the courts into another legislative branch, right? So the courts are supposed to be very unique, and they're supposed to be deliberative, process-oriented, say no to more cases than they say yes to. And so the question is, where do you strike that balance? Alexander Hamilton predicted that it would be mostly based on public opinion, that judges are still people too, and they're going to look to public opinion. This goes to more of a democratic argument than a republic-style argument. I will defend precedent more than overturning, but I definitely think the court has gone wrong in a variety of different decisions in the last 60 years. And I think that what happens is you have very activist decisions, and then they decide not to look at it again under a conservative belief of precedent.
I think I would lean more towards precedent, though, as well, though maybe for a different reason. I think it's because we need accountability. The problem is if judicial decisions are entirely at the discretion of the judge, it becomes very difficult to correct legal trends through anything other than appoint better judges, which
I
can
agree.
be an incredibly long-standing process. And even then, it's what, a crapshoot? I mean, you don't know everyone's opinion on everything. That being said, I do think that to an extent, judges are legislators. This is actually a critical legal theory perspective, which fed into CRT. The idea that within the bounds of discretion, judges will almost always side with the political biases they have. And that's not like a dig on any side, that's just what we are. That judges who identify as liberal or conservative will overwhelmingly side with each other in the plurality of cases because our biases do inform us. I think that we have to recognize that's a reality, but we do have to constrain the process through judicial precedent, or otherwise it's just throwing darts at a wall.
I just want to point out, one of the super chats noted that we were trending.
Oh, is that right?
And so I'm like, all
On
right,
Twitter or on YouTube?
on Twitter, but
Oh.
it says content creator Vosh debates with radio talk show host Charlie Kirk on Twitch.
Oh,
We're not
are
on
we on
Twitch.
Twitch?
We're not on
That
Twitch.
Amazon
We're
propaganda.
on YouTube.
Shoot
I just thought it was
propagated.
funny that it was
Well, at least
wrong.
we're trending.
No, but it's like how did you get
But
that
it's
wrong?
wrong.
Unless somebody's
Come on,
like
man.
screen grabbing.
It's
and
the
putting-
Twitter. Hey, listen. After the Twitter trending title descriptor had to spend like 6 weeks in a row describing everything that happened with those Minecraft YouTubers, I feel like this is they're a little bit off their game. You saw that,
Maybe
right?
somebody's
No.
restreaming it on
What
Twitch or whatever. You know,
I
which is
know.
copyright infringement. I'm just kidding. It
No,
is.
I know
but-
that. I know that Shu did a stream commentating on us.
Oh, really?
hey, sure.
This one. Maybe that was on Twitch. I don't
All right, so we got one from Dylan Perrick. He says, "Do you guys think philosophy could be taught instead of CRT, like Plato's allegory and the cave? In my opinion, stuff like this helps people better understand one another individually."
I'm hugely in favor of more theoretical classes being taught to high schoolers. Philosophy, sociology, and I don't know what the modern equivalent of like finance is or home ec would be, but something like that. Kids graduate, they don't know anything about anything when it comes to managing their finances, which is weird.
We agree.
Because
Yeah.
that will destroy them if they don't. Like, why don't we teach them that? Philosophy, everyone should be learned on, just flat out. I think that's a moral necessity. And when it comes to sociology, I'm not even talking like left-leaning inclinations on that. I mean like the basic ability to read like statistical information on what's going on, because for the rest of their lives they're going to be asked to vote based on political information they don't have the education to understand.
Yeah, I mean, philosophy comes from a Greek word, love of wisdom, philos, sophos, and we definitely don't have that right now in our country. And yeah, I'm a big fan of teaching it. I just want to teach it correctly. I'd say a lot less Nietzsche and Kant and Hume and a lot more Aristotle and Locke and Aquinas and Augustine. And I think the problem is, though, if philosophy, if not, so Plato would say this. So Plato would say, I'm not going to teach philosophy until you could do advanced Euclidean geometry. It was his rule. Now, why would he have that rule? He's like, if you can't think rationally and be able to determine good ideas from bad ideas in the I'm not going to even get close to teaching you about the allegory of the cave or the ship or Plato's Republic or the forms. So I think there's actually something to that if you introduce philosophy too early, you can create kind of one-liner philosophers that think they understand the entire world. And it really goes to that expression, the more I know, the more I realize how little I knew when I thought I knew it all. That's the kind of that idea of daring to know.
The corollary is true too. You know, the scientists who worked in the Manhattan Project, many of them said they cultivated inspiration from religion and from philosophy, completely outside the bound of physics, but it got their brain a jogging, you know?
So I'd love to talk to you about religion and just like where you think that fits into a functioning
We should
society.
definitely talk about religion. This would be really, really interesting. Why don't we do this? We'll move to the members only segment.
Okay.
We'll focus on religion. And for everybody who super chatted, I know I really wish I could get to every single question and comment, but when you guys, we ask a question and you guys have that debate, that's the point of this. So, you know, I try to do as many as we could. And
I do
thought
like talking.
I just thought it was better to let you guys talk
Thank
instead
you.
of constantly trying to just cut off the actual discussion and the flow of things. So my apologies to everybody who super chatted. But if you go to timcast.com, become a member, we are going to now have another conversation, which I don't believe will be up by 11 p.m. this time because debating religion, I absolutely love the religious conversations we've had on this show on Timcast IRL. So it'll be
My
at
favorite.
timcast.com. Smash that like button, subscribe to this channel, share the show with your friends. And do you guys want to shout? You can follow us at Timcast IRL. You can follow me at Timcast. Do you guys want to mention any social media stuff?
If you guys could subscribe to the YouTube channel and hit the bell, we'd be blessed by that. And also check out rumble.com so you don't get censored. RUMBLD.com.
All right.
Yeah, no, I do not endorse Rumble.com, just for the record. So that was listening to the Charlie Kirk and Vosh debates. Does anyone have any comments, questions, concerns? All right. Well, let's go ahead and listen to Vosh's recap, because it looks like he did a recap for his followers. Good girl. All right. Thoughts on his... He spends a whole hour discussing the 2-hour debate. Yikes. We might not make it through this before my D&D group starts. So, let's give this a listen, shall we?
So I'm very tired right now. I'm kind of burning at both ends of the candle, but that's not going to stop me from telling you that the debate that I had with Charlie Kirk was kind of pog. I imagine some of the people who are watching this right now, or who will watch this in the future, are people who are watching it exclusively because of that debate. And if you're a Tim Pool fan or whatever, hello, howdy. Very happy to have you here. The first thing that I want to say, and I'm not going to belabor this point, the first thing I'm going to say is that when I was going into that debate, I was under the impression it would be some 3v1. I couldn't have been more wrong. It wasn't an exaggeration that I employed for drama's sake. It's something I legitimately believed. But credit where credit's due. I think that Tim Pool was an exceptionally fair moderator. I do. No, I do. That was a one-on-one right there. That was me and Charlie Kirk. Yeah, I think that anybody looking at the content of that debate in a fair light, I'd never seen Tim Pool actually moderate a debate before, so I didn't know what to expect, but he actually fact-checked a few times. When he fact-checked Charlie Kirk on the whole spike protein thing and corrected him on that.
Yeah, that was really
wow.
pog. Yeah.
Hey, thank you. You know? Thank you very much. So I won't complain about that. It was a 1v1. And I want to talk about that 1v1. So before I get to actually talking about the debate, every day the left gets a new opportunity to disappoint me. And I was expecting some pushback on this, because invariably when I do stuff like this, people, they accuse me of platforming people like Charlie Kirk. This happens every time, okay? Now, I don't know what people think platforming means. I don't know what they think that word means. But I'm not capable of platforming Charlie Kirk or Tim Pool. Okay? I'm not capable of legitimizing them. The opposite is possible. They're much larger than I am. The logistics of responsible platforming, it's a complicated subject, but you are so far off base when you are looking at what happened and thinking, damn, if only it wasn't for Vosh, nobody would know who Charlie Kirk and Tim Pool were. Okay. Whatever you say, man. So, I expected some of that. Unfortunately, some of the dumb shit takes came from Robert Evans here, which is sad, because I like Robert Evans. We can see my white denim jacket, my drip, coming in here. And I just want to respond to this really quick, because I feel a need to. Debating the far right is dumb. Debate is useless as a method for discovering truth. I won awards in it as a kid. It teaches you how to bulldoze people words, how to force your point through with trickery. That is why grifters love it. With words, fucking autocorrect. So he came in at the end there, he recognized his critical error. So I guess I'll just lightly critique this, because stuff like this bothers me. And do you mind if I say something that comes off maybe a little bit self-centered? I feel like the only reason people say this is because they don't like me. Was there any debate bro on the left discourse before me? Only to the extent people consider Destiny on the left, which has always been sort of a variable topic, but I feel like for the most part, this is something that people just use to attack me. Like if people don't like me, then all of a sudden the act of debating people on the right is this horrible, destructive, subversive process. You know what I mean? Yeah, but they don't do this with Sam Cedar. In fact, and here, this is what really pisses me off, and I'll respond to this in full, but I read through this thread for a little bit, and Robert Evans does respond to a few people. Yeah, here we go. Somebody says, just let Sam Cedar do it, and Robert Evans says he's one of the only people in left media who understands the game enough to play responsibly. Motherfucker! So just say you like Sam, but not me. What do you mean? Sam was also willing
in his own way, to go on Tim Pool's show, to talk with Tim Pool, and he's talked to Charlie Kirk before. What do you mean? Oh, he understands the game. Come on, just say you don't like me. Why play this game? You guys remember when... Oh my god, am I still trending? I'm still trending.
Yep.
Oh my god. You guys remember when I raised over $250,000 for the Palestine Children's Relief Fund, and Mike from PA, because he didn't like me, had to find a way to condemn it, even though he participated in the fundraiser that Chapo Trap House was doing at the same time. So he was like, I'm not a fan of the liberal act of charity. Now, some charity donations are fine. It really depends on the... It's like, just say you don't like me. Come on, dude. Anyway, so the reason why this point from Robert Evans is super, super dumb is that nobody said debate is a good method for discovering truth, okay? Debate is nothing but attention grabbing, all right? Debate and all forms of public political engagement are nothing but the attention economy. You do what you can to grab as many eyeballs as possible, and you try to move people over. Can you move your opponent over? Almost never. Almost never. But can you move indifferent audience members over? Yeah. Yeah, you can. I like people who take this position, by the way, believe that, like, they believe this in spite of all fact, all logic, that nobody gets pulled over by seeing their faves get demolished in a debate. And this is such an empirically falsifiable point. There are literally hundreds of thousands of people online, through me, through Destiny, through Sam Cedar, through David Packman, through Kyle Kalinske, who have had their opinions changed, swayed left, because of some favorable debate showing. That's what it does. And if we're speaking, by the way, about the logistics of the attention economy, hey, it's a good thing that Charlie Kirk and Tim Pool are like 20 times my size. So, anyway, just say you don't like me. Don't waste my time with stupid half arguments that you back up on later, because there are actually people who do debates that you do like. So, just shh. Okay. So with all that being said, the debate itself. I think I won. I guess I don't know how anyone could feel otherwise, but I'd like to talk about why I feel that way. So you should watch the debate. Go watch it on Tim Pool's channel. Just go. I'm not going to re-upload the whole thing on my thing. I might re-upload some clips, but it is worthwhile.
Yeah,
to look at it.
We already.
So I
just
noticed
listened to
something
that, so.
right at the beginning of the debate. Okay. Right at the beginning, Tim Pool brought up vaccines in the context of, what was it, that New York proposed bill, and Charlie Kirk came out the gate hard.
Yes. Yeah. Big time.
What was his first dig? You claim to be anti-corporation, yet the corporate-produced vaccines are things you want people to take.
Yeah.
And he
Charlie
was
Kirk
like,
literally
"That's
made himself
ironic,"
look
and he,
like a
repeated it
total
multiple
tool.
times too, you know? And
Loved
I'll
it.
tell you this, okay? Charlie Kirk came into that altercation at a disadvantage because Charlie Kirk is used to live debate. Those stupid, brainless quips are really effective in live debates because he stops and the audience roars its approval because they're just here to see Charlie Kirk. Without an audience, stuff like that doesn't work as well because you can just ride the silence.
Yep.
You can just disagree. Those dumb little quips don't have the natural momentum that's provided by the crowd's approval. And he's used to debating publicly. If I debated him publicly, a format which I am, by the way, completely inexperienced in, he may well have come off looking far better, even if not a word of the debate had changed. But we were in a studio, which is something that I am used to. That didn't go too well for him. And the further we went through the conversation, I noticed his tone changing. At first he came off confrontational, but the longer it went on, he backed off of that. And it was interesting to me because at certain points in the debate, it felt less like a debate and more like I was educating him. And I don't mean that in a condescending way. I mean that very literally. Like I was being given an explicit opportunity to just sit there and give my full thoughts on something. And the reason why that means so much to me is because, and this is why I exceeded my expectations beyond my wildest dreams here. And it's that on so many of these points, I got no pushback. he was not willing to defend the state anti-CRT laws. I brought it up like 4 times, and not once did he even try to defend those. On the vaccine topic, which always devolves into conspiracism, of course, I think I made a compelling argument for the positive freedom that you gain through mass vaccination because you prevent the perpetual spread of the disease. When it came to the broader discourse on critical race theory, I got the opportunity to actually describe the value of some of these theories. And not only did I have the opportunity to do this, he actually kind of picked and chose what he was willing to argue against. See, in a debate like this, you can never choose every single point from your opponent to tackle, you know? You can never do it. If you want to argue down every single point that the opponent makes, you'll be there forever. You have to be selective. And he was more than selective. He was downright, you could call it, conservative in the points that he was willing to tackle, you know? He immediately backed off the spurious association with critical race theory and what he called wokeism. Did you notice that? Immediately, he acknowledged that critical race theory is an esoteric academic theory that has very little application in high school. And then he was like, okay, so it's really about wokeism. So I don't even need to argue that it's a moral panic. You admit it. You just attach a scary name. I said it. So it's a scary name you attach to this to keep people, you know, fearful of it. And I didn't even get pushback on it, which was nice. I feel like he may have had, either he or his people associated with him, they may have known that I was very prepared to talk about Martin Luther King because he came out with that Martin Luther King was a mixed bag statement. Like he didn't want to like do the conservative mistake of attributing like absolute moral worth to him ahead of time. So he was like fronting it with, yeah. Which, by the way, optically looks great for me. No matter what. I mean, just by default, that looks really, really good. Because if you're not willing to accept the civil rights propositions of Martin Luther King Jr., then you're against literally all civil rights. I mean, you no longer have MLK as like the one good one anymore. You're opposed. It's like, oh, we're not anti-civil rights. We just hate everyone and everything and every idea that's ever been used to promote civil rights, you know? So I'm glad that he didn't even bother with that pretense. I guess the thing that really made me happy is that it felt like every time there was a core point that I wanted to make, I feel like I got away with making it virtually unchallenged. He didn't have a response to the pharmaceutical company nationalization because he does this like populist anti-corporate front thing. You can't out anti-corporate me. I'm a socialist. You're not. Like you're only baiting yourself. Like, yeah, I'll nationalize the pharmaceutical industry. Yeah, 100%. Okay, so you can't that you can't take that. You can't go further than I can on that. So I don't know why you'd even try. The further the conversation went, it felt like he started acting in a little bit more good faith, almost like I was getting interviewed, which again I appreciated. I love talking. There's actually a segment that I wanted to show. It was clipped by leftist Ryan Knight on Twitter. It's just 2 minutes. I want to look at it really quickly because I think it illustrates what I think I really succeeded in doing in this debate, if I may. There's Charlie.
People graduate by the time of high school to be skeptical, apprehensive, and not very proud of the country, or eventually tell a true and patriotic story where you have people graduating that are thankful and have gratitude. That's the purpose of education when it comes through.
Gratitude is not the purpose of education.
Well, I think gratitude's a moral necessity.
Yeah, I remember this part.
No, you should be grateful for the people in your life, but I will never be grateful to the state. I'm not that much of a collectivist.
Well, not a state. Are you not thankful that you live in America?
I'm thankful of the things that make my life easier. I was born white to well-off parents, and today I enjoy many of the benefits of having really responsible and attentive parents.
Are you thankful you have constitutional rights that are protected by government, given
True.
to you by God?
But do you know how those constitutional rights came about? They were fought for by whiny bitches like me who were never satisfied with what they were already given.
They were granted by God, protected in the Constitution.
They were fought for by
1787.
whiny, same as the 14th and 15th Amendments, everything that's come since, we fought for them, and it is discontentedness
Are you
that
thankful
leads
for
us
those
to
people
fight.
then?
I'm thankful for their efforts, as am I for
There's some gratitude.
Sure, I'm grateful to them. But patriotism, I'm grateful to what people in America do. But America's a concept. It's been used to do a lot of good and a lot of harm.
It's a home.
Well, a home can be I mean, in the broadest sense, but I know what my home is. I know where my family lives, and I'm loyal to them. When
Stuff like this is really, really effective, you know? One of the things, so there are a couple of perceptions that people have of left-leaning people that can be used to sort of outright dismiss them. One of them is like the cringy SJW, and because I was calm this whole time, I think I was fine. But with this one, like, one of the stereotypes is that like lefties are like these shiftless, deconstructive losers who can appreciate nothing. They're always mad. They're always. But the point I'm trying to make here is that the deepest appreciation is born out of criticism. Appreciation means nothing without the contrast of knowing that it's been built up from something lesser. You know, that means that's the heart of appreciation. You have to know something was done wrong to be thankful. The reason I'm thankful for my parents being so cool isn't just because they're so cool. It's because I have so many friends whose parents were so much worse. I didn't learn how good my parents were until I learned how bad parents could be. Their worth was always meaningful, but I didn't really appreciate it until it was contextualized.
it comes to this country, though, this is a political and economic bloc, and I have only one concern, and it's that the people in this country live the best lives possible. Also outside the country, but I live here. This is my backyard, and when I want people graduating, from high school, I don't want them to feel this sense of contentedness. Contentedness is the death of activism for all that's good, and activists have always been. You're an activist in your own way, as am I, have always been the forerunners for good.
They've done a lot of damage, too.
Sure, they have, but we make the world move. And I want to get kids interested in the flaws in this country because that teaches them to grow up and care about them so hard they fix them.
This is
Hey, stuff like that, because it's important to remember, okay? When you criticize America, the reason I want people to be critical of America, it's not for its own sake. It's not because I hate America. It's not because I'm ungrateful. It's not because I'm disrespectful. It's because I believe in improving the things around me, improving the world that I live in. And you can't do that unless you are willing to acknowledge these criticisms, It's a non-essentialist critique. And at the end of the day, it has always been the discontented who move us forward. I'm really, really happy with this particular segment because I think it illustrates the most charitable way you can depict the perspective of people like us, radical or reformist, and I enjoyed that. I enjoyed that very much. There were so many things that I tried to avoid over the course of this conversation. I really, really care. It's really important to get across a couple of powerful ideas, You don't want anyone to feel guilty for being white or male or anything. You don't want to assign any inherent guilt, I actually can't believe it when I think about this. Charlie Kirk is a big media figure, And I've seen how he talks. And this is not a guy often in the peripheral of nuance. This is not a person whose media profile is often adjacent to nuance. But I got to describe structural racism, and they accepted it. I actually can't believe that. That's more than I've gotten from almost any conversation that I've had with conservatives. I couldn't believe it when I got away with that. I was able to describe the concept of inertial systemic racism, that as a product of past harm, without specific redressing, that harm continues. And I didn't get a pushback on that. And that is insane to me, I can't... That's something that I thought I'd have to fight tooth and nail for that, but... And it's important, too. And of course, I'm always speaking to the audience here. I talk with Charlie Kirk. I'm talking to him, but I want the audience to hear me. And I know how that must look to them. You have Tim Pool and Charlie Kirk. And
Both of them are
I
arguably
describe
very right-wing.
systemic racism. And they accept it. And that to me, I mean, that if everything else had gone poorly, but I had managed just that would have been enough for me. But everything else went good too. Not everything else. There are a couple things I could have done better. By the time we got to the abortion stuff at the end, I'm gonna be honest with you, my debate juice was running out a little bit. I came into that debate hella nervous. So when it came to the abortion bit, I was more like, oh god, the nuance of philosophy. So my debate juice was a little run out there. When it came to some of the history stuff, I don't remember every like detail of which year which state banned slavery. But to be honest, I felt like his rebuttal kind of came off a little bit weak, you know, because he was like, you know, America wasn't a slave state. It's just there were states in America that were slave states. Okay.
What does that change?
You know what I mean?
Part
like,
of America had slaves,
yeah, and it turns out he
all of America
was inaccurate on some of the points there. But
slave state.
I feel like
because
even
that's what
giving
the United
him that,
States
it's like
type country is.
okay.
It's a
And then later
United
I said, well, it still
Confederacy
falls
of
under the
other
purview
states,
of the federal
yeah,
government to
they're considered
legislate
one
whether or
state
not that should
under
be
the
allowed.
law.
He didn't even like push back against that.
rather
so,
than
yeah.
two.
Man, I'm really happy with
more.
how that went. Any other things that I could have handled a little bit better? I think I could have done a better job. The main thing that I fucked up with on the vaccines was I forgot that the Johnson & Johnson vaccine wasn't an mRNA vaccine. If I remembered that, I could have come with that dunk earlier, before Tim Pool pointed it out. But that's fairly minor. So I don't think that was a huge deal. Let me think. What else? Oh, the Tim Pool talking about like soldiers leaving the military because of how woke it is now. I can't defeat the anecdotal stuff, you know. I feel like Tim does it a lot too. It's like, you know, I know a guy. There's only so much I can do about that. The defund the police stuff. Yeah. Oh no, I think that was fine because Tim was trying to make the argument that the rise in crime was because police budgets had been cut, even though crime has been rising steadily in every part of America, and not just in the cities where the police budgets had been cut, you know? Yeah, it's just, a very spurious association. I kept saying that, didn't I? Spurious correlation. Plus police budgets haven't been cut. I think a few did, but most of it is like, they've tabled some proposed budget changes, and yeah, you have to remember, of course, in situations like this, there's always going to be a limit to how much stuff you can dive in on. And I'm never as concerned with digging into every single individual point as I am to tackling the underlying message. You know what I mean? Your take on reparations? I think my take on reparations is sound. The thing that I'm happiest with is I didn't think that I had to. You kind of mixed up with the notion of reparations. Yeah, let's do racial reparations, but it's actually welfare and socialism. No, I didn't say that. I just said that if we're going to do reparations, the best thing that we could practically do would probably be like a great revival of like underserved neighborhoods in this country. And by the way, guys, is that the first time I've said that? Definitely ain't. I'm sorry. Pragmatically speaking, look, do I think that there's a strong moral argument to be made for some kind of like direct reparations to black people? Yeah, I totally. But in practice, that will never happen. What are you going to do? What blood quantum measurements are you going to do? You really going to have people pulling up family notes on who they were owned, like their family was being owned by like 120 years ago? No. That's just not going to happen. I think that we need to work on a pragmatic, immediate solution that will have a strong and lasting impact, not only on the poor in this country, but also on racial inequality, because this would be a service that disproportionately benefits people of color, mostly black people, because of how these neighborhood redlining blocks get pushed. Vosh, why not both? Because if I'm going to defend the concept of reparations, I'm going to defend the concept, the implementation, which is A, easier to do, B, will probably be more effective in the long run, and C, I think will have a more substantive and like politically agreeable push for it. You know, that's what I'd go for. I don't know. The whole thing about the popularity of BLM wasn't great. I don't know what charts Tim Pool was looking at, because I've taken a look at the dwindling support for BLM, and no chart that I've seen had numbers as low as the ones that he was citing, you know? Pew Research support for BLM, unless I'm like horribly misremembering. Yeah, Pew Research. Yeah, here we go, see? In Pew Research, back in June 2020, 67% of all adults supported BLM, but he said at its height was 48% or something, which, you know, it's also worth noting that Democrat support has basically not changed at all. Republican support has been cut down to like less than half of what it was, you know? I think he said 48 now. No, didn't he say it went from 40? I know the chart that he was using, the numbers were different from what I was looking at. Whatever. Anyway, 48 now. Yeah, I know. I believe it's 48 now, but I thought he said that it hadn't been as high. I don't remember the specific number now because I'm very tired. My memory's bad. What about reparations for Black Americans who suffered from redlining? I feel like that's the easiest one to defend against a conservative. The problem is that stuff is like really, really difficult to empirically prove on a person-by-person basis. Like, really think about it. A lot of redlining was just like people being shoved into neighborhoods through like the illegitimate discretion of people who were responsible for, like, you know, making housing available to people. Like, how could you prove that? Like, hey, my great-grandfather had enough money to get this house in 1936, but they didn't let him. But then later, in a worse neighborhood, they let him. Like, stuff, the problem, I'm looking for solutions that don't, like, require every black family in America to dig through a bunch of archives and then submit to a court a huge amount of information, you know? Because if that's the, like, metric, the threshold that we're going with, it's going to be really tough. Really, really, really tough to do, you know? Sometimes you just got to keep it simple. And that doesn't mean that's everything we can do. We can do more, but the immediate approach, the best immediate approach, for me at least, is the one that I advocated for, in my opinion. That's just my opinion, and, you know, it's definitely something, you know, people might vary on. Did you hug Charlie Kirk? No, he's significantly taller than me. I did shake his hand. People want to know about the butt. I literally, at no point did I ever see Charlie from the side or from behind. I'm really sorry. I'm being serious, actually. Taller than you? Yeah, he's huge. A few other points that I want to touch on, though. First of all, the behind-the-scenes show went well. We talked about religion, some other stuff. I don't want to spoil, but, and I am proud of this, no spoilers. You can see it if you want. You know, I respect the members-only content. I'm not going to break that line. But at its end, Charlie Kirk emphatically agreed with my preferred strategy for producing market socialism. Unironically, like full out, like direct government subsidization of worker cooperatives for the to the effect of expanding them, and he acknowledged that worker co-ops are a effective and in some cases superior economic metric. And no, I'm not joking. That was at the very end, but if you want to see, you can. Yeah. Does he actually know what a worker co-op is? Yeah, we talked about it. Yeah. We talked about it at length, I think. Not as much as I wanted to, but at length. And I like that. I mean, this is one of the reasons, again, this is one of the reasons why I'm so fond of this approach, because it's really quite agreeable, you know, to left-leaning people, and I think even people who are more moderate. The idea that you're taking this from a democracy-first approach. It's not about some vindictiveness towards the bourgeois. It's not about some, you know, broad national project of collectivization. It's about the individual workers and their individual democratic right to live in a society where the work they do affords them the decency and the freedom to make decisions about their workplace. And that's a good, functional way of approaching that, you know? Do you think you agreed with you only because it's not really a subject of popular culture war? I'm not gonna lie. I just think it's really tough to argue against me. I really think that a lot of the points that I was making there were pretty like difficult to. I mean, right? Did you leave with the same impression you previously had of Charlie Kirk?
Oh,
he's
heck
definitely
yes.
more. At least I get the impression he's definitely more committedly religious than I thought he was. Wow, he reminds me of some of the people that I grew up with. Though they were Jews, not Protestants, but there's an attitude of religious fundamentalism that informs the conservatism, you know?
Yeah.
Charlie Kirk actually seemed very good faith in that discussion. He was significantly more good faith than I expected, for sure. There were some attempts at digs there. He was also more well-read than I assumed. Don't make the assumption that people like Charlie Kirk are unintelligent. Okay? Just don't do that, okay? Because very rarely are they. Sometimes it's easy to take a look at the sort of reductive, stupid talking points conservatives engage in, and you think like, oh, well, this person must be an idiot. No, that's just the rhetoric that works with conservatives. They can be quite intelligent. Always keep that in mind. Don't underestimate me. You're way more of a pessimist about humanity than I thought, lol. I think people respond to the incentives societies build for them. One of the things that bugged me, I said this in the debate, one of the things that has always bugged me about socialists is that they sometimes make arguments in favor of socialism, which make it sound as though socialism could only work if you presuppose humans are naturally generous, beneficent, giving. And I think that's idiotic. Like, so what? If a person has naturally pessimistic attitudes about humanity, they're just not capable of the socialism? Yeah, no. It's all about incentive structures. If society encourages people to behave poorly, they will. And if it encourages people to behave well, they will. And I think that people are remarkably susceptible to environmental stimuli when it comes to directing their moral impulses. Now, for me, yeah, I think that's an optimistic take. Because when I think about that, I think about the world we live in, where there is significantly less violence than there has been throughout basically all of human history. There are more people on Earth and less violence, and we somehow, in spite of the incredible complexity and infuriating alienation inherent to our society, we still manage to get along. And I think that's really cool. He totally lost in the vax argument. I will say this. I am very, very, very happy that I was familiar with the nature of that self-reporting system. The one where if you take a drug or get a vaccine, you can report information on a website, you know? Because, wow. Yeah, VARS? Yeah, VARS. Because if I was not familiar, I looked it up and looked into the details. If I was not familiar with the specifics of that, I would have been really stumped on that point. Yeah. Basically, it literally is just like anybody can submit any opinion or any complaint. It's basically, it's like, imagine a new drug hits the market, you know? And then in the coming months, there are like 500 reports from people saying, yeah, I took that and I have heartburn. That's kind of a startling coincidence that like maybe is worth looking into, you know? The problem with COVID vaccines is that hundreds of millions of people have gotten it, and there's also a propaganda campaign convincing people that it's dangerous. So how do you know, like, hundreds of millions of people get it and then some people die after? How do you know that's from the vaccine? Like, seriously, how do you know? Like, what's the correlation between getting the vaccination and dying after? Like, people will die anyway. Did it anger you when Kirk impugned polygamy and homosexuality? No, not at all. It worked for me. That was another key rhetorical tactic, is you always have to be funny. And you have to be lighthearted, too. when I made jokes about like 3 parents, 12 parents, he has to be serious because to him that's degeneracy. I don't have to be serious when I say that. For me, it's just funny. So I get to look like I'm having a good time. Tim's laughing with me, Ian Moonlord is laughing with me, and I get the and but Charlie Kirk has to be serious because it's an offense to his moral sensibilities. Same with homosexuality. If I'm talking with like a religious bigot and they're like, I believe in traditional marriage, okay, my feelings aren't going to get hurt. But them having to look all serious on that point, at least to some of the more socially liberal Tim Pool audience members, can make him look worse than me.
Try again.
You know what I mean. Talk to your doctor about voting for Biden. Yeah. Yeah. Not gonna lie, in the second half, it seemed like he was trying to present to people that you were more conservative than you thought because he agreed. Yeah, that was really weird to me. I don't know what his direction was at the end there. Remember when I said I want to maximize freedom for as many people as possible as long as you don't infringe on the freedom of others? And he was like, well, what about pedophilia? It's like, well, that would infringe on the freedom of others. And he was like, well, what about kidnapping or rape? And I was like,
That would infringe
that
on
would-
the freedom of
Yep,
others.
That would infringe on the freedom of others. And he's like, guess you need conservatism after all. Interesting. I don't know what that means. I'm afraid I
Please
don't know what that
tell me
means.
I'm gonna have to start over.
Yeah. But the whole dynamic was flipped because
Damn it.
the
Yeah, start
line
over again.
has always been that the left is authoritarian, censorious, and collectivist, and that the right is all about individualism and freedom. But in this debate, it was made very clear that the opposite is the case. That Charlie Kirk was defending the concepts of authoritarianism, censorship, to an extent. He didn't hold to that point too hard, but sort of implicitly. And sort of moral policing, whereas I was just defending freedom, And I really like that switch being flipped because I think that's a more honest representation of where the line actually is. I almost lost it when Tim Pool said you can make just as much money playing guitar as selling drugs. That was one of those things I really didn't want to get in on. Oh my god. Would you really think that if you're in like some of these neighborhoods, you could be like, yeah, dude, my mom's got like a slip disc and she can't pay her medical bills. I'm gonna go to a local bar and play guitar.
No, you can't. Like as I said, Tim Pool is
Selling socks.
horribly
Yeah,
out of
what?
like there's no way around.
Yeah, and he
it.
made $140 an hour playing guitar. I mean, I don't know. Maybe Tim Pool's really good at guitar. I don't think everyone's that good at guitar. You honestly should have gone hard on that one. It's about the momentum. It's about the momentum. Did Charlie Kirk have security guards? No, he didn't. Tell us, is his face as small in real life as it looks on camera? Honestly, this is gonna disappoint the fuck out of you guys, but the small face thing is a self-perpetuating meme. In person, I think he looked totally normal, apart from being super tall. Sorry. No, I know. The gum to teeth ratio is bad. Well, he smiles with his upper lip, which gives him almost like a sneer by default rather than a smile. You know what I mean? But I don't think that's. Yeah, I don't think that's like bad. Just an aesthetic, No, I will, Berman. Don't worry. Charlie's 6'4" or 6'5", I think. Do you think you made a good enough distinction between the two CRTs? Yeah, even he conceded it. I spent so much time reading up on real critical race theory because I'm very familiar with wokeism. I've done that, but real critical race theory. Whoever recommended those opening arguments podcast episodes, what was it? 502, 503, and 511, I think. Those were great. Those were a really great introduction. I read into it. My laptop, I had a bunch of quotes that I was ready to go on. I had all the CRT bills lined up. And then the CRT bills didn't even end up being relevant because he never defended the government censorship. And God, it was so much fun hitting him with that. Charlie Kirk wants the big hand of government to censor free speech. I love saying that shit, man. I love having the shoes on my feet, So I didn't even need to touch that. The MLK stuff, he backed off immediately with the whole mixed bag line, so I didn't need to cite him because that already kind of is a concession to me in a way. And with regards to the critical race theory stuff, they didn't actually seem that interested in talking about the academic critical race theory thing, you know? Which, I mean, fine. We'll talk about wokeism, whatever. I'm cool with that. The funny thing is, I could be misremembering this, but didn't you guys get the impression that a little while into that debate, I was talking about actual critical race theory, not just the wokeism stuff? And they kind of didn't have a problem with it that much, you know? I was like, yeah, these are like complex academic theories that are meant to be challenging. They're divisive. You're not supposed to like agree with all of them. They're a way of prompting critical thought. And how rare is it for me to get the opportunity to sit there and engage in the nuance of the subjects of moral panics? Yeah. And the whiteness thing. I got to get away with the whiteness thing with the League of Legends analogy. Humor does so much, okay? Whiteness isn't the same as being white, you know? Sometimes you can refer to, like, a broad group pattern without it being, like, an explicit distinction of it. But then it's like, yeah, it's like, you know, when you make fun of League of Legends players. But they backed off it after that because it, you know? I also got the opportunity to talk about, is a man free if he's set to the desert without food, water, or clothing, which is rapidly becoming one of my favorite. It's not as catchy as the Coconut Island, but I am very, very fond of that one. No, it's not. No, it's not the Coconut Island. The Coconut Island analogy is about how it is inherently exploitative to trade or engage in free exchanges with people when you have more power than them or when they need something from you.
Yep.
Whereas the desert analogy is about the difference between positive and negative freedom. Why didn't you bring up Coconut Island? Because we never talked about the implicitly exploitative nature of commerce, you know? You're splitting hairs, Vosh? No, they're different analogies. You really should have read up on early American history. Yeah, there's always going to be stuff I can't. Yeah, no. I mean, it's something I should learn more about in general. But yeah, the positive and the negative freedom stuff is really, really, really important to hit upon. This is my argument, by the way, for mandatory vaccines, which, by the way, they also let me get away with. I said that I wasn't really a big fan of needing vaccines to go to restaurants and stuff because that seems logistically complicated and kind of a pain in the ass. But if they made it part of going to school and traveling the way we do with all other vaccines, then, you know? And they let me get away with that. I can't believe that. But for me, the argument with vaccination is this. And I'll say this, and the right-wingers are completely right on this one. Forcing people to get a vaccine is a violation of their bodily autonomy, okay? That's true. However, when it comes to autonomy and freedom, you have to make trade-offs sometimes, you know? Technically, it is a violation of my bodily autonomy to prevent me, for example, from, like, running around naked in the neighborhood, you know? I'd say it's a reasonable violation of my bodily autonomy. Fine. So maybe more specific with, like, medical things. The thing is, with regards to vaccines, it's true that it is an infringement on your freedom to get you a vaccine. However, it is an infringement on everyone's freedom to compel them to live forever in a world ravaged by plague.
Yes. Thank you.
You know?
And
that's
please stop calling
that
me
is
Webby.
also an imposition
It's,
on people's freedoms.
Nebula
I
is
want
the
to have
queen.
the
I'm just a
freedom
royal
to
consort.
be able to live without a permanent virus
Thank you for the help.
cycling through the world.
That's
a freedom I think I'm
let's
entitled.
deal with this.
And we're not going to get that unless we all get vaccinated. You know? How'd the religion debate go? I don't want to spoil stuff in the members only section. A lot of it was just like sort of philosophizing because I don't believe humans can make statements on metaphysics or metaethics. However, I think I got a good point in. Did they spring that on you or they tell you in advance? I didn't have much info in advance, but I didn't expect to. That's fine. I don't need like a forewarning on every topic, you know. Did they take your laptop? No, I had it right next to me. I just never used it. Did you see all the grippers in chat? Oh, the Nazis molding were amazing. If you went on 4chan, or some parts of Twitter or whatever, they were absolutely seething. Nick Fuentes has been banned off, like, every platform, so now, like, the only thing that, like, he can get hard to anymore is the thought of being platformed by somebody who wasn't, you know, who was smart enough to not get nuked off every website in existence, you know? And like, all Nick wants is the attention. Like, if Nick ever got, like, I feel like if Nick ever got caught by, like, To Catch a Predator, that'd be a win for him just because he's that desperate. You know,
yeah.
for a camera
I mean,
on him.
that is
You
fair.
know what I mean? Like any
that's
any
a fair
camera
assessment
on
of
him is a
Nick
good
Fuentes,
camera.
to be honest.
Just absolutely anything. But there were people on 4chan, they were seething. The funny thing was, I actually got sent a clip from Nick. Nick Fuentes was seething because he said there's no way anyone could believe Charlie Kirk beat me. Because he really hates Charlie Kirk, you know? So yeah, I thought that was fun. By the way, again, they'll never believe me, but they have no reason to be upset about any of this, because if I won and my ideas took hold, all of their lives would get better. Would that be platforming if you debated Fuentes? Yeah, at this point, it would be platforming. At this point, like, I'm being serious. At this point, legit, like, Nick Fuentes has had nearly 2 years to email me and have a conversation. My patience is not unlimited. I'm getting bored. Eventually, I'll be big enough that the cost-benefit analysis is not going to tip in my favor anymore. Like, it's not like the conversation with him would be like a battle of the minds. You ever seen him talk? He's a fucking moron. And his followers don't care whether or not the shit he says makes sense. Like, what would we get? He'd be on for 5 minutes, he'd call me fat 70 times, and... would we talk about a point? No. Did your sub count increase since yesterday? Yeah. Kyle made 2 videos on the debate. 2 videos on it? Wow. Vosh destroys Charlie Kirk on vaccines with facts and logic. Vosh and Charlie Kirk debate libertarian socialism and freedom. Damn. Well, that's nice. Apparently, the on the majority report they published, or did they publish it, or was it just? Oh, here we go. Majority report fan has opinions about the show, Jimmy Dore, Vosh, and the Red Brown Alliance. I actually caught a listen to that a little bit while I was in the shower about an hour ago, because somebody, Discord I saw, and this guy was like, you shouldn't say nice things about Vosh. He's called all trans people he disagrees with mentally ill. Not to mention he said the N-word. So on and so forth. And you know what the first thing Sam Cedar responded with? I swear to God, I love this man. The first thing he responded with was, you know, I've said the N-word on air too. You know, back like 15 years ago, I was criticizing a racist perspective. I wouldn't do it now. And I'm just grinning from ear to ear. God. Good stuff. It really is. Anyway, you know, I'm having a big old I'm having a big old giggle about all this. You know, there are always Diesler said you were better than he would be. I find that hard to believe that he would say that, but if he did, then appreciate it, I guess. With regards to oh, he did? Oh, well, how nice. With regards to the debate, I'm happy with my performance. There are always ways to improve. Always ways to improve. I think I'll probably rewatch it on my own time at some point, and maybe see like point by point. You know, I don't want to do it on stream unless it's a little while out from the actual thing. Then again, Pimple did make quite a few views off that. I can't believe how much attention this got. It's okay. Can I just end with this? Okay. It is astonishing to me. I can't mentally get over where I am right now. You know what I mean? Do you still not know how famous you are, Vash? It's just weird to think about. You know? Like, am I still trending on Twitter? Or did I misread the thing, the sidebar? Nope, there I am. Still. 24 hours later. The whole political internet, you know, I can't... It's so weird to think about that. the debate VOD has nearly 500,000 views. The comments in it are really positive too. You know, the comments are really positive. This was a pleasant surprise of a debate. Vosh hit this nail on the head. This was A+, one of the only healthy, civil, and productive debates I've ever seen. I came here expecting a hostile debate, but I gotta say, and then they say positive stuff, this was probably the best discussion Charlie Kirk, Vosh, and Tim Pool have ever done. I can say I don't agree with Vosh and all that much, but his beard is on point. Look, we just need... Can we just acknowledge the drip? Okay? That's what we need to acknowledge, all right?
Okay, so 25.
Proud.
Not 25.
Drippy and
not
proud.
20.
Look at that.
I need.
I'm sorry, but I hate the jacket. That's okay. It's meant to evoke strong feelings, you know? As a final point, there will be people who look at this and they'll say, I could have gone harder. The answer, of course, is that, yeah, I could have. But going hard in the debate environment that I was in is a very risky prospect. See how it hurt and backfired against Charlie Kirk early on? He tried to do it early on, and it like really set him back, you know? I would rather, on platforms like that, in situations like that, play it close to the vest than risk everything, you know? By trying to get really tough duns, you know? Someone in Tim Pool's chat said you were being disingenuous for trying to look like a doctor with your coat. Ha! I didn't even think about that. That's kind of funny though, right? It does lend me a sort of unearned air of medical expertise, doesn't it? That is very funny. I wasn't even thinking of that. They've seen right through you. Oh yeah, I'm gonna end this now. But look, I can't believe this. After the debate was done, not only did I get to go on a house tour with Tim Pool and fans and friends, and boy howdy, is there a lot of shit there. But yeah, they have like 6 fucking 3D printers. Okay, but also they had a gigantic debate promo poster that they had Charlie and I sign, and they had portrait illustrators. They had drawings of both Charlie and I that we signed those as well. They're going to go in some big wall debate hall of fame. That goes to Tim's house. And I got a goddamn... I got a goddamn gift basket. Look at that. Huh? Yeah, come on. Yeah. So that's fun. Oh, and I gave Tim Pool one of my shirts. You know? So it was a fair trade. It's a fair trade. Oh god. Looks like Breaking Bad. It does look a little bit, you know, it's got that vibe. Better not be the shirt with the pink hair girl. No, my shirts. The shirt. Why didn't you give Kirk a shirt? I only had so many extras. Alright. Well, those are my thoughts. I had a good time. I did. I'm really happy I went. Now, keep in mind, I am still running off of no sleep from last night. I have not slept since that debate. So I need to take care of myself. There are lots of donos to read. They'll all be read when I stream tomorrow. I'll stream tomorrow. It'll be 5 p.m. We're going to get back into a more regular streaming schedule. I just want to say there are a lot of people watching right now. I really appreciate you guys. You know that? I still really cannot believe. I have trouble reconciling the unbelievable changes that to my life that I have experienced over the past couple of years. And every step, I feel like the last one was impossible, and we're not doing it any further. I couldn't have imagined 2 years ago, like, oh yeah, one day you'll be debating Charlie fucking Kirk, you know? I couldn't have imagined. but this is the world we live in, and I really appreciate you guys sticking with me through it.
In Congress right now. You guys want to know who it is? I'm not kidding, and I'm not exaggerating. This is absolutely true. Cory
I gotta
Bush.
turn this off.
Yep.
It's funny, right? Because when
Gotta turn this
she
off.
was running against the Democrat,
There we go. Don't want another copyright claim from TYT. I've learned the hard way on that one. Okay. Hang on. Looks like we got about 14 left to go. You said you've got 2 over there. Thank you, Krotos. Hang on. I'm coming. Oh, right. Whispering Woods. Right. Sorry. It looks like some of my setup froze. Fixing it. There we go. And before you ask, Moon AU, no. I do not like any women at all. Doesn't matter if they're cis or trans. Just women in general are a nope. Like some femme, non-binary people, yeah. Trans men, oh yeah, definitely. But I do not like women at all. Right? Okay. Then let's see how many I've got left to go. I have to get... Looks like I need 5 more lamp grass and then I can buy lamp grass. And yes, I'm saving story quests for another day. There's one. And is there more right there that I'm just not seeing? There we go. Okay. There we go. Thank you so much for the help, Krotos. I'm going to go ahead and go back into single player mode so I can go ahead and go to the floral shop and buy some. Thank you so much for your help. I appreciate you coming to hang out. Because I'm going to have to end stream here in like 10 minutes, so that's the other reason. Right. Thank you. I do not have the time for harvesting at the moment, as much as I may want to harvest more. Oh, wait. Oh, I see what you're saying. Have to buy fewer. Got it. I see what you're going for there. Again, I appreciate the help. And one of these days, I'm going to have to come to your world and just hang out. Because I'm starting to slowly catch up. Alright, Mondstadt it is. Controller connection issue. Go. I need to buy more flowers anyway. Just in general. Like to buy some flowers? Certainly we have a fine selection. Sold out? Oh no. Well, that's mildly distressing. Oh, but I harvested enough anyway. Exactly enough, as a matter of fact. Bloop. Ascension rank 5 Diluc. And I got a free wish out of the deal. Alright, so. Let's go ahead and Alright. Alright. So now that we've got that settled. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Took longer than I was expecting. There we go. Thank you for the help, Krotos. AR-56. I actually don't know what that's going to be like. I can speculate. Let's try... And then I can do it once more. Both are duds. Okay. And then the free wish on the standard banner. Also a dud. So, I mean... So, what we did today, we advanced the Adventurer's Handbook to Chapter 9. We have a whole bunch of artifacts at rank 16. We ascended a character to rank 5. I have to ascend 2 more weapons to phase 5 before I get that reward. And enhance a weapon all the way to level 80, which I can actually do that really quickly before I sign off, I think. Yeah, I think I can do that before I sign off. I've got 5 minutes. Details and hunts. Sword of Dissension is now rank 80, and I've got that little adventure experience buff there. We've cleared... Okay, so yeah, it's literally just weapons and artifact enhancement. 2 characters with 4-piece sets of 5-star artifacts for the first time. Hang on. Four-piece sets of 5-star artifacts. So let's... Let's actually take a look at this, because I think we might have picked up... You know what, that'll be for another time. Ladies, gentlemen, everyone in between, everyone exempt, everyone floating violently between the extremes, be safe, be well. Have a good night.